journalists and content creators that created a group called Tenet Media, like Lauren Chen, Tim Pool, Benny Johnson. Who else is in that? Lauren Southern, um, Taylor Hansen. And Taylor Hansen and I do spaces once a week. We've kind of taken a break for a while, but we are now back. So that I had to push this space to today. And I wanted to do this yesterday because I was watching. I was in the morning. I was at work, and I remember catching the Nancy Pelosi, the leaked recording from when she was inside the SUV, whether she knew she was being recorded or not. And we're going to hash out both those ideas. Millie and I kind of just chatted about it a little bit, but I think it painted a little bit different picture for me, given all of the stuff that we actually chase surrounding January 6th, which a lot of people don't. I mean, we can talk about, between the Blaze and Revolver and everybody, I think they've pretty much got the timeline figured out, but that's not really what we're doing here. As you know, Millie, released the Sunrise Zoom calls, and that was all about around election time and shutting down DC. And then as we got into that investigation, started finding documents, including a document called The Count, and it started to really kind of bring things into picture. And so we've been talking about that for like the last couple of years. And then obviously the pipe bomb story we kind of chatted about. And so we were kind of laying all this out. We really didn't have all the pieces. We really couldn't figure it all the way out. And I still think we're flirting with the total truth. And a lot of the stuff I already knew. Obviously, a lot of stuff I'm going to be playing here tonight, I already knew about. I knew it existed. But I need to repaint the picture so you guys can really kind of absorb where my mind is on this. And I think immediately a lot of people, especially on the Nancy Pelosi thing, and I'll give my take on that. I saw a lot of people saying, oh, she pre-recorded this just in case so she could have plausible deniability later. Not a bad theory. Not a bad theory. But when I lay out my theory here, I think it'll make more sense that that's not the case. But we'll see. And I have people on here that know what they're talking about on the panel, and we kind of tease this out a little bit. And I'm going to set the stage. I've got a ton of clips put together. Matter of fact, when I posted this space, there's somewhat of a rhyme or reason to it. But like if you go to the original post, um, I'm gonna put that entire thread because I basically threaded everything that I want to play and talk about on the space under the original post. So let me go grab that. Okay, so those are all on the thread. We'll start with the Pelosi tape. Okay, so let me go find the new post. I hate how they do this. Like, why not just keep um, for the integrity of the space when you create it? If you put stuff below it attached to it, why can't it just move with it? It really annoys me. But down in the chat, I'll go ahead and throw it up in the nest. So if you guys want quicker access, you can.
If you want, while you're pulling that up, Trash or Aaron, I will, I guess, give my thoughts and take on the Nancy Pelosi video.
Well, let me play that. Let me play it then. So just in case people, for some reason, for whatever reason, haven't gotten it, and then I want to get your take. If that's, I've got it here,
Okay.
so I'm ready to go. So.
Oh, you've got it. Okay,
Yep.
good. I thought you were looking for it.
No, I organized this earlier. I just had to go grab it real quick and from the other thread. So this came out on the Oversight Committee subcommittee, June 10th, and it's new footage. And this is stuff I think that they got from like subpoena, so I don't think it was leaked per se. I think they got this because they. I know that like the Oversight Subcommittee and many people within Congress got troves of stuff from January 6th, and I think they either subpoenaed this, they got it somehow, but it wasn't really necessarily leaked. And this was put out on June 10th, and it was Nancy Pelosi that essentially they're saying here she spent 3 years and nearly $20 million creating a narrative blame Donald Trump. New footage shows on January 6th, Pelosi admitted that I take responsibility. And oh, yeah, you have a piece in this. I just don't think it's the whole piece. But anyway, I'll play it for the space now.
We have responsibility, Terry. We did not have any accountability for what was going on there, and we should have. This is ridiculous. You're going to ask me in the middle of the thing when they've already breached the inaugural stuff that should we call the Capitol Police? I mean, the National Guard? Why weren't the National Guard there to begin with?
They thought that they had sufficient
No,
resources.
there's not a question of how they have, but they don't know. They clearly didn't know, and I take responsibility for not having them just prepare for more.
All right, so let's hear your take on this. And again, I see where some people are saying it. I just want to push back, and I brought some receipts to suggest it. Okay, but yeah, Millie, go ahead.
Oh, okay. So the thing I find really fascinating about this video is it in a way it made me kind of second guess or question some of my initial I guess theories on what was going on and who knew and whether or not Nancy Pelosi was part of a greater conspiracy working with these leftist groups that were pre-planning J6 as well as the federal bureaucrats that were gumming up the bureaucratic processes and slow walking things, which would make complete perfect sense for why these threat reports were essentially slow walked. Later on, reports came out that verified that that exactly was happening, including threat reports from the New York police that were slow walked and slow, they didn't reach in time, which was a really big indication of something was amiss. And so the thing is would you rather believe? Would you rather believe that our government, that these people are just very corrupt and that they know damn well what's going on and they're part of this, this swamp group that's acting in clandestine ways, or that they're just completely inept and negligent and incapable and incompetent? And so this video makes it appear as though Nancy Pelosi is just completely incompetent and that she's a puppet that really is kind of kept out of the loop on some of this. But I don't know at the same time if that's what the intent of filming this video was for, right? So it's one of those things where, okay, did they film this as an alibi to give plausible deniability to her, or is this really just how negligent our government officials are, that she was kept out of the loop? I don't know. Those are my thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on it, Aaron?
Well, I'm going to I am going to lay out a case for a theory that I have that I talked with you about it a little bit, but I'm really going to lay this thing out here. And before I go to Thomas, I don't want to get derailed right now. Corey, I save your comments so I can get through this, please. Um, so I also want to play this clip. This is Nancy inside the office with Alexandria, her daughter. And in that context, so that clip that we just heard was after, right? This is when all chaos is completely taken over the Capitol. But while it was happening, and this part is really pivotal in my theory. While this was happening, this was recorded.
Secret Service said they have dissuaded him from coming to Capitol Hill. They told him they don't have the resources to protect him here. So at the moment, he is not coming, but that could change. If he comes, I'm gonna punch him out. I know, I would pay the fee. They're waiting for this, for trespassing on the Capitol grounds. I'm gonna punch him out and I'm gonna go to jail and I'm gonna be happy.
So that's really important part of my theory, because this really ties in, Millie. The basis for this theory here is that that I believe at somewhere, Intel contractors, maybe it was some bad actors within DoD. I don't know, because I'm going to bring in the Millie and the Secretary of the Army stuff too, because there was a major general that was interviewed by Congress, by Josh Hawley and by Senator Cruz after this had happened, and there was some weird rule changes that had never been taken place before, the day before January 6th, and it kind of stripped the power of him being able to actually call the National Guard. And we saw the letter from Muriel Bowser. I'm going to go through all that as well. But my general thesis, and I think we can work toward it here, is that some sort, I don't know who is involved, and we're gonna talk about Lisa Fithian, we're gonna talk about Sunrise Zoom calls, we're gonna talk about the horizontally aligned affinity groups like Antifa, BLM, Shutdown DC, Sunrise Movement. that were doing these sunrise Zoom calls, that were doing the planning. We can talk about Transition Integrity Project, the document called The Count, all of these things. And Lisa Fithian being at the center of it. Lisa Fithian being at the center of just about anything that happened around the world, including training people for things like this in Turkey, including pulling things off in the Middle East, not just here. The most recent example was we identified her at the Columbia University protest, taking over that building. And so it is a common theme that is a common tactic of hers. And I believe in some way, I can't prove it, but some way either connected to the intel communities or CIA or somebody's running these ops. And my theory was, Millie, was that a lot of these people, including Nancy Pelosi and a few other people, were essentially briefed by whatever group this is, suggesting that Donald Trump is absolutely going to commit a coup. The language is all through all those documents. We have to make sure it's known as a coup. I think they were kept in the dark. I think she reacted to it. And I think that she reacted to it here by saying, "Oh my God," started rubbing her hands together like, "This is so politically advantageous. Let him come in, let him come in." I don't think she was central in the planning of it. I think they would have kept her in the dark. Given the two stark contrasts of the reactions during and then after what we just played, or we just played the during, and then the after was the ride in the SUV, lends to that. And there's going to be a lot that I also want to talk about in this context. And I think we can bring a lot to paint this picture because that's what I'm left feeling like after I've seen this video today.
So
Yeah.
let's just pretend so that we can kind of go down the different possibilities, the different, scenarios or possibilities that could have actually happened, right? Let's just pretend to take the video at face value of Nancy Pelosi that maybe she really didn't know, right? Maybe they kept her out of the loop. Maybe they told her that there were not any threats. I mean, it could be possible. She could just be a drunk puppet in politics that they kind of keep out of the loop. One thing I do know, which we're just kind of going down this, taking it at face value, if this is the situation or not, which I could totally see it being a different situation. So let's just play this through. The one thing I do know is that the Sunrise Movement, these leftist pro Bernie Sanders groups, hate Nancy Pelosi. They have multiple times done office takeovers of her office. Now, at this moment, they're bird dogging her fundraisers. They are attacking her fundraisers and her events, especially over East Palestine and just anything they can. There's a lot of infighting in the Democratic Party. So I don't think that it's entirely out of the realm of possibilities that she may have not known. But one thing I will say for certain, Sun, the police chief, he requested the National Guard multiple times, according to his affidavit. He was rejected by Nancy Pelosi's sergeant of arms. Okay? He really wanted that. They called a meeting, and that meeting was with Secret Service, DHS, and the FBI, and obviously Capitol Police Chief, and then Nancy Pelosi's sergeant of arms. I believe Pelosi was in the meeting, but I'm not entirely sure. And the thing is in that meeting, those law enforcement agencies told them, and in their reports, they said there was no credible threat. They said, there were all these various groups that were going to be there, which is interesting because some of the groups that they had in their initial report were some of these leftist groups that I was reporting to them about that had plans to take over the Capitol. But they said that there wasn't a credible threat. And so that's what allowed for them to go and base off that information in that report to not have the National Guard there. And as I recall, the word is that Nancy Pelosi said she didn't like the optics, and they didn't like the optics of the National Guard being there, which I could understand, that maybe it might have the optics of election. If we're all under the mindset of they're stealing our election, and if the Capitol's fully gated and walled off by military, it might kind of feel like a coup, right? So I understand that argument, or if that's in the realm of possibility of the real reason. However, the problem I have with all of this is that I was sending reports to um, the DC Metro Police about these groups and communicating with their detectives. I was communicating and sending these reports to Secret Service and DHS CISA, and I was actually communicating with DHS CISA about their CISA employee Laura Robb, who was in the calls. And obviously we're sending all of our stuff to FBI tip lines. So yeah, I think that it's more likely that not only my reports, but the reports from the New York and several other different law enforcement throughout the country that were sending their reports, that was intentionally sabotaged. It was slowed down, slow walked by these swamp federal bureaucrats that are in our government conspiring against our president and working with an outside subversive Marxist group to run their agenda, which that was all exposed in the Sunrise Zoom calls, specifically in the Feds for Democracy Zoom call that was 2.5 hours long, as well as their documents and things of that nature. So, I mean, I guess I could kind of entertain that, but at the same time, it just seems too damn convenient that Nancy Pelosi's people filmed and recorded this rant of hers, right? Like, you would think if she's having this off the cuff, she's upset, she's responding, that why would they, one, film this, and who released it? How did it come out?
So the oversight subcommittee is the one that released it. They're the ones that actually put it out. So they must have gotten it through subpoena. Somehow they obtained this from her. And that's why they released it underneath their official banner, number one. Number two, again, I think she was really worried about the back blow on her because clearly she knew that there was shit going down. And she was like, no, I want to punch him in the face. Let him come, let him come. And I think she probably didn't anticipate what actually popped off next and how that all turned out. And that was a reaction of her going away from the Capitol at that time. That's my gut feeling on it. That's how I feel. That's how I see it. Thomas, I'm coming to you. Before I do, let me play this minute and 44 clip that I spliced together. It's Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz. I spliced it together, and they're interviewing Major General Walker. And this was back after J6, but this was a few years ago. And they were interviewing him on, because they still have masks on, right? So this is still COVID policy, and they're 6 feet apart and all that bullshit. So he's saying that the Army Secretary and SecDef changed the rules for this specific moment. And then then I want to get Thomas's take on this because I think it fits right in to kind of the questions that you had, Million, that I have, as we still try to fill this in because I think there's more to here. I think there's way more that we can talk about here.
I'd start with you, if I could. You've testified to several senators today that you faced restrictions for the deployment of the quick reaction force that you had assembled, and those are restrictions that you had not had to deal with before. Is that broadly correct?
That is correct.
What is your understanding for why those restrictions were put in place?
Well, Senator, it was never really explained to me. So I'm a major general. I don't question the people above me. Secretary of the Army is the Secretary of the Army. Secretary of Defense is the Secretary of Defense. So all I know is that it was I had restrictions that were unusual to me. I hadn't had them in the past.
You answer the same question, and in particular, whether you had the authority to employ a quick reaction force prior to the January 6th, and would that have potentially made a difference on January 6th if you had been able to do so?
So, Senator Cruz, I would have had that authority prior to January 6th to direct a quick reaction force. So the Secretary of Defense, his letter authorizes me to use the quick reaction force, and it says only as a last resort, where the Secretary of the Army, his direction to me withholds the authority to use the quick reaction force And he will only authorize that and only after he has a concept of operations sent to him, a CONOP sent to him. So that was restriction that was unusual to me. I had never seen that before.
And that's what bothers me, Millie. That's what bothers me. So this is why again, I've been talking about this now for a while, and including the last few days. That's why I wanted to do this space and break it down with subject matter experts on all of us, right? Because you're the Sunrise Zoom call. So I mean, I've become one, but you are the original originator. And when you consider people like Lisa Fithian, who is a world traveling socialist, progressive organizer, I mean, she has to be intel. She can't just be some leftist goofball that organized protests. And when she's always at the center of every major event, and including the Sunrise Zoom call, she's on there saying, we'll be in a crisis, but we're going to create the crisis. And whoever has the guns wins. And here's where all the police stations are in D.C. And here's where all the Trump-friendly areas or RNC-friendly areas are on this map. And this is what we're going to do, and we're going to bring it to them. And same tactics at Columbia University just recently with when they sieged that hall there. Same thing that she pulled in Turkey. Same thing she pulled with the Sunrise Zoom. And why would the Secretary of Defense and the Army Secretary of the Army change these rules and give two sets of orders? So you had one set of orders from the Secretary of Army, which was far more restrictive. The second set was from SecDef saying, well, we just need to take a look to see what's going on before we approve anything. So basically, this Major General who was in charge of DC National Guard was basically forbidden from ever even being able to call up. Forget what Nancy Pelosi could have done. She could have, I guess, she could have ordered the Sergeant of Arms. They could have done something. And Thomas, I'm coming to you on this. But this is what I'm saying. It feels bigger than just a few leftist groups, and it feels much bigger than just get a protest getting out of hand. I haven't even brought up Epps or anybody else. I want to
Well,
lay
we
this.
know it's
Yeah,
bigger than just a few leftist
yeah. But I'm
groups.
saying that like I want to lay this groundwork that it's what it feels like to me, man. It just feels like Intel had their hands all over this thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you even look at the caliber of individuals that were in the Feds for Democracy Zoom calls, okay? I took the time to go through and actually like vet these people. You have people who literally are on national security councils. You have people who are formerly Obama staff, people who are like I guess congressional staffers and aides to Democrats formerly. People who literally teach as professors at universities in the basically teaching military intelligence level stuff, like national security level stuff. I'd have to look up the exact titles, but I mean, they're teaching like naval strategy, and then you have a lieutenant colonel of the Air Force in the call as well. So I mean, we know that these people are many of them actually held and still probably do um security clearances. So we know that these were federal bureaucrats as well as people in intelligence with security clearances that were doing this and participating in these calls. And the thing that they were doing was they were coordinating with the leftist protest groups. And that's why they talked about the inside outside strategy being the people on the inside are doing strategic sabotage works, including conducting strategic leaks, sabotaging policies, you know, targeting people in the workplace that aren't sympathetic to their cause to get them fired. I mean, there's all kinds of things they discuss in the 2.5 hour long video um, that were clandestine, as well as like sharing CIA sabotage manuals on how to do these things. And then they were working closely with these leftist protest groups, which are many of them funded by Open Society and George Soros, and having connections with NATO and with basically Europe, right? And especially USAID. And then it's like, okay, you wonder why the first thing Joe Biden did when he got in office was immediately start sending, all this money to Ukraine and essentially funding a NATO proxy war. Well, many of the people who were in the calls in the little conspiratorial meetings were also Atlantic Council and State Department. And what do we know about Atlantic Council? Well, Atlantic Council crosses over with Shadowgate. Remember when we were basically blowing the whistle on Obama's national security advisor, General Jones, who helped build the psychological software programs that they commercialize and are now being used on people on social media. And so what you also find with some of the other people part of their little conspiratorial meetings, many of them were NATO connected, Atlantic Council connected. So I mean, this 100% is not just these little protesters. Obviously Lisa Fithian is a skilled street trainer. Like, she trains these Antifa and these street kids and has them engage in cult like activities where they literally have like literally they've got altars with bizarre stuff and little weird spiritual
And
chants and
songs and stuff.
sessions.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they clearly have that part, but that's just a small part of what this group was doing. And then clearly the connections with this group and the get out the vote operations, as well as this group and the authors of the count document, which they were heavily doing videos on and circulating in their groups. Those authors of that document, Becky Bond, Zach Malitz. Becky Bond was the campaign director of Bernie Sanders' political campaign, right? And one of the interesting things is it almost seemed like, do you remember how it was kind of weird? How the Democrats all started campaigning really early. Like, they campaigned the year before actual campaign season, and then during campaign season, there was the pandemic, and nobody was really allowed to campaign. So the interesting thing about that was, if you notice, they were building war chests. Okay, that's what a lot of them were doing, is building war chests. And then Bernie actually had the biggest gatherings out of anyone that I saw. Like, I went and was covering the on the ground action there, and it was interesting because they pretty much they rigged their own little Democrat primaries, and then they gave it to Biden because he was the establishment pick. And Bernie's camp essentially morphed into a behind the scenes action. So what happened was that whole little infrastructure that they built out, because mind you, it takes time to build a campaign and a working group of people. They migrated that group of people to doing these behind the scenes activities so that they could have, I believe, culpable deniability and a separation between these clandestine activities, the get out the vote activities, the pre-planning J6, and the working with these, Feds for Democracy and, TIP scenario exercises, so that they would have the Bernie camp doing it and not Biden's camp. And the Bernie camp were willing to do it because that's how they were going to get their little shoe in into Biden's administration, by doing these favors. So yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't just only little
No,
protest
that's right.
groups.
And actually, Thomas, I am coming to you now because I don't want to stray too far, but I'm going to come back to that, Millie, because I've gathered all of this stuff that we've been talking about, that YouTube that I found where they're actually using their own faces, their own words, going over the plan, the document called the count. I'm going to read page 35 once we start. It sounds like we're about to get into the heart of J6 here. And then again, I'm going to add some additional stuff here and read that page 35 of the document called the count. All of it's down below. And I'm going to play a couple clips. It's really spooky when you play them now and listen to them and think back to the events that happened leading up to, we're talking November through December into January 6th. Bizarre stuff. And again, that's going to help bolster exactly what you're saying, and you're spot on. Thomas, go ahead, get in here.
Yeah, thank you. So, Millie, I have sat through a couple of January 6 trials, and the prosecutors will mention threats received. And when but they don't always mention who the groups are. So if they were a Proud Boy or something like that on Parler, the prosecutors always say who they are. But they mention threats from other groups. Okay. So whenever I hear that, this is what I think happened. About why did Nancy record this piece of video we're talking about now? It's a setup and it's a script. And then why did she put Terry's name in there? Why are we responsible for what happens at the Capitol, Terry? It's because I've seen a report and I'm trying to find it. I think it's by John Solomon of Just the News, where Nancy Pelosi's chief of staff had received a threat about January 6th and never turned it over to her sergeant at arms. So I believe she is had that set this script ready to go, and they filmed it. We are responsible. She's trying to say she's not responsible. Somebody in her staff didn't give their information to Sergeant at Arms. Oh, and I'm going to pass it back, but Trash, I'll put a couple things in your appeal here. One is Jesse Kelly talking to Mike Benz 2 days ago about how the military is involved and how they actually had a simulation. But you can listen to him in the post I made. He tells you where to find it. The military, there was a simulation on what to do, and I think the third one was if Donald Trump doesn't concede or something. And then I also put a video, it's a rare video of the acting Secretary of Defense Miller on that day saying there's way more that has not came out. But just to summarize, I believe Nancy Pelosi is protecting her own personal neck and throwing the staff under the bus because they received a threat that they did not turn over to the sergeant at arms.
It actually lines up. So it actually lines up with a lot of what Millie was talking about, what I was talking about. I didn't catch Mike Benz's, but I know. So this is something that we've been talking about quite a bit. This came out of the Sunrise Zoom investigation in their documents hub, and we were looking over it. Oh, so they ran. So they ran the Transition Integrity Project, right? And that was different scenario exercises. Donald Trump wins clean. Joe Biden wins heavily challenged constitutional crisis, or Biden wins easily. And it was these situation exercises. But they also, what they didn't report on until later, was that they also concurrently ran military war game exercises in the same respect. That did come out, but I know what Mike's talking about because it was basically in congruence with the Transition Integrity Project. And what we're talking, and I, so your theory again still fits in with mine, saying whether it's Nancy Pelosi doing CYA or that those threats never came through, they never mentioned who the other groups were, only if it were some kind of right wing person, but they weren't mentioning the other groups that were lobbying threats, which lends credence to my argument that these leftist affinity groups organized with members within our own government, and Nancy was not necessarily clued in on it. She saw a political opportunity and then saw it blowing up in her face very effing quickly with how bad it got. Thus, making that video, maybe it was a cover her own ass because she knows she's also on camera saying, "I can't wait to punch him in the face. I've been waiting for this trespass," and so it still fits in my theory.
Hey,
And
Trash, let me
yeah,
give you just a little bit more, one more bit of context. When you guys are watching that video and she is saying they breached the inaugural stuff, she's talking about the Lower West Plaza and the police line down there, right? Because by the time this video, whenever she sees it, it looks really bad. I have another theory. I don't necessarily think the cops expected it to go down. The people who planned January 6th planned for it to go down the way it did. I don't think they expected the police to start a riot on the Lower West Plaza by shooting people in the face and throwing hand grenades at them. But and I don't want to get into that. It is just a theory. But I think she saw that chaos breaking loose, and she's talking about they breached the inaugural. She's talking about what the inaugural stage is on the West Plaza, and I think she realizes that looks so bad. Oh my God! And she instantly starts thinking about protecting her own self. So I'll pass with that, guys.
Well, one thing that I say actually fits with the different theory that Nancy Pelosi knew, and that this could potentially be an out, like the video itself being filmed the way it was could be an alibi.
Yes.
Okay, is that in the document the count they specifically talk about physically taking over the Capitol
here, I'll
building
read it.
in
Millie,
order to shut down and
yeah,
disrupt the electoral college vote, which I'm
I'll read it.
paraphrasing,
I've got
but
it right here.
Aaron can
I've got it
read
right here.
it.
I'll just go ahead and read it, and then you can finish up. That way, everybody knows. Yeah,
Okay.
this is from page 35, document called "The Count." It came out October 2020, so just a month before the election. These same groups, the Becky Bond, who was formerly on Bernie Sanders' campaign, and Zach Mallett's, these guys, they were all over it. But on page 35 of the document, this is one of the plans that they had after the war game exercises. This is what they said. Democrats in Congress must use every constitutional, procedural, and political means necessary to delegitimize Trump's attempt to usurp the presidency, up to and including voting in unison against any Republican effort to count Trump's electoral college votes, ordering the sergeant at arms to remove Republicans from the House chamber, boycotting the electoral college count, and staging protests inside of the Capitol make it physically impossible for Congress to meet. So that's what Millie's talking about. Go ahead, Millie.
So actually, what I'm actually going to reference is actually going to be the paragraph that immediately follows that. So I'll have you go ahead and read that second paragraph.
Yeah, I'll pull it up right now. So that was page 35. So let me get down to it. 26.
Yeah.
Here.
So that, yeah. Did you find it?
34, 35. Yes. It says if Democrats in Congress can't win the fight to count Biden's lawfully chosen electors, then its strategy should be to delay the count and, if possible, prevent it from ever being completed. If the votes haven't been counted by January 20, then Nancy Pelosi will be sworn in as acting president. Throughout the fight, we must demand that Trump concede.
So yeah, this is the part that makes me question whether this is just a video of Nancy Pelosi trying to cover her ass and have an alibi, because they're talking about a possibility of Nancy Pelosi being able to be made the president because she was Speaker of the House. And what the idea was is, oh, disrupt the electoral college vote count, and if you can get it to where they don't convene again in time, or or they're not able to for whatever reason, then if you don't have the electoral college vote count happening before inauguration, then the Speaker of the House becomes the next president. And so that Nancy Pelosi would be set to gain by that type of situation happening. So I find it interesting that, she's kind of very much at the center of this whole thing. And obviously in their plans, they talk about this being a contingency, a possibility that, they're rooting for her to be made president.
Hey guys, Trash, real quick. You mentioned something about, or you guys weren't really sure where the footage came from. And from what I think Oversight Committee posted, that they subpoenaed HBO to get the footage that Pelosi or Pelosi's daughter had handed over to them. And the documentary was made. Well, clearly we never saw that clip in the documentary. But so I've been trying to figure out the last day, how did that slip through the cracks? And I still don't believe that it would have been intentional, or that I don't believe that that would have slipped through the cracks. Like, there's a reason that that clip of Pelosi saying that was able to get into the hands of the Oversight Committee. My 2 cents.
Isn't that amazing, though, that they just so happen to know to be filming a
No,
Netflix documentary and an HBO
you guys,
documentary?
did you
Yeah,
watch it, Millie? If you watch it, I mean, it made me sick to just watch the trailer. It is put together masterfully. It's so, I mean, Pelosi manufactured the whole thing. 1,000,000%. I mean, no one will convince me otherwise.
yeah, I mean, they completely had the cameras all ready to go, right? And not only that, but remember, John Sullivan and Jade Sacker were filming a Netflix pilot as well. And that the whole premise of their little documentary, which was supposed to be about, one brother being the MAGA Trump supporter Proud Boy, and the other brother being the Antifa BLM kid, and their like fights in their family and their fights. And the interesting thing about that whole situation was how their daddy worked in psyops, had a background in psyops, and from a witness that I knew that knew both the brothers and the father. I had talked and actually interviewed a witness and took a statement for him, and provided that to authorities. These brothers' dad would talk about psyops and narrative control all the time, and he was a Proud Boy, the guy who came forward, and he said it was always really weird because, the one brother, James Sullivan, would set up all these Proud Boy rallies, and then next thing you know, here comes John Sullivan and his Antifa BLM protesters, and then they would clash the two into each other. And the next thing you know, there'd be all these leftist news pieces covering it, saying, "Oh, civil unrest in the streets," that were then used to make Trump look bad as a president. So this is the level of psyops that this family was engaging in. Yet they were at the center of this whole thing. They were filming a Netflix pilot on this, and there was that off the cuff moment where, John Sullivan says to Jade Sacker in his footage, we did it, we did it, I can't believe we actually did it, wow. She says, "You were right, John, you were so right." And he's like, "Yeah, I know, I knew, I told you it was going to happen, I knew in the chats, da da da." Right.
Yep.
And then the other thing is when he was arrested, my guy who was the source as well, he went and actually met with John and Jade immediately following John's release. And I have an undercover recording of John Sullivan admitting in the recording that they knew that they were going to take over the Capitol before, and he went and did this whole thing.
But
So
Yep.
yeah.
And he
yes,
wasn't the father a
well,
judge or involved somehow?
Sorry, what'd you say? It was breaking up.
John Sullivan's father. Who is he? Wasn't I thought he was a judge.
No, no, he was not.
okay, but again, I have to push back. Like I listen, I maybe Nancy Pelosi orchestrated the whole thing. I don't believe she's smart enough to do so. I think she maybe had enough power, I guess, maybe to do so, but I just don't think so.
She
I
had to
think
be. I'm
I
sorry.
think that there was a political opportunity for her to do so. I also think, based on the Feds for Democracy Now, the Sunrise Zoom calls, watching these DHS contractors, members within our own government participating in these Zoom calls, that people like Yogananda Pittman and there are key people placed throughout like the government that help facilitate this. We know this because they help facilitate the leaks. They help facilitate gumming up bureaucratic processes. We know that they had pipelines to leak stuff to certain members of the press, and they had entire signal groups and back channels set up to be able to do this, to do strategic leaks. All of those things are true. I can't for the life of me just say yeah, Pelosi's at the absolute center. I think she was kept dumb about a lot of things, and I think there were other ops running, and I think it went much higher than her. And I think that she also fits into those ops without knowing it all. I'm not running cover for her. I hate Nancy Pelosi. I,
No, I
I
yeah,
agree.
agree. I think that both could be true, and they could have pulled it off either way. So I think both she could have either known or not known, and they could have pulled it off either way, because these politicians have so many handlers around them. So many, that even recently came out in that, I think it was Thomas Massey, where he said, "Oh, everyone's got a pack or whatever handler." But yet, aside from that, a lot of them have handlers around them. They've got people doing the work for them, telling them where to go, what to do for the most part. And so, yeah, I believe that's entirely possible. I mean, you really think Joe Biden's running
well,
half
no,
of what's going
no,
on
it's
in his
it's the
administration? He's not
no,
doing
it's the
anything but eating ice cream and
yeah,
sniffing
and it's the
kids.
National Security Council and State Department that have their hands all in the layers of bureaucracy inside of the White House, including Obama's former people. Sure, she left just recently, but we know they're all in there. We know what's going on there, right? I agree with that. I'm saying I agree
Like
more.
James O'Keefe had that recent Project Veritas. If you remember, there was a State Department employee that was talking about how, oh, Joe Biden, we know he's not all there. If you remember that one, that's kind of the sentiment, is like there's this group inside that's just running things, pulling strings, and they use these people. The front faces are essentially puppets to a certain
Yeah,
degree.
and like listen, like we know. Oh, actually, I was just about to bring this up. So there's a comment down there. I was literally just about to say this, and I was reading the notifications. I'm looking for comments. I appreciate the crowd is engaged as well. Put some questions down there below. There's a couple things that we need to square up for some folks here so they understand. Susan replies, don't forget that Mark Milley met with Valerie Jarrett in December sometime. Yeah, that's a big one. Miss Valerie Jarrett, if Jen was here, she'd probably rant about Valerie Jarrett for an hour. Yeah, that's a great point. There's also another point that was made. How do we square? Let me see if I can find it. It was in my notifications. Said, how do we square 1 second. How does your theory on Pelosi's square with Yogananda Pittman having the intelligence and then getting a cushy job after. I would say this: they could be implicated, and they had completely pre-working knowledge of what was going to go down, and therefore that's what they were earned. Or simply it was, hey, we know you're at the center of this. You probably have intelligence, probably saw this. Keep your mouth shut, and we'll make sure you're taken care of. It could be one of those two things. I just hate jumping to conclusions, but I know we're close. Like I know we're flying close to the sun on this to try to figure this out. I just want to make sure that I'm hashing it out rationally both ways, so I can figure it out. But Helena, you've been waiting for some time. I'm coming to you, and then Thomas, and then Corey. Go ahead. But yeah, go ahead, Helena.
Thank you, Aaron. Millie, hello. Hi, Tommy. I too have sat in on a lot of trials, and Tommy's absolutely correct when he said that they never mention the names of the groups unless they're a Proud Boy or an Oath Keeper. Also, Trash, I would really like for you to bring up, and he requested Freedom for All. He's a Gen Sixer, and he has a lot to add to this conversation. You're going to be very surprised when you hear him speak, although I know you still have a lot to unpack. I think he's going to add a lot to this conversation. So if you would bring him up, I would appreciate that. But all of this needs to come out because what you're doing here this evening, as per usual, Aaron, is bringing receipts. And for 3.5 years, this country was gaslit by the press, the left, and we were all told, and they shoved the same 5 clips down our throats every single time. So that's why these conversations are so incredibly important, so that we can unpack all of this to get down to the bottom of the truth, because that is all we have ever wanted. It doesn't matter if it implicates somebody, even on our side, because we've got to get down to the bottom of this. So I am really just very thankful that you're doing this. You too, Millie. I appreciate you guys. And if you would bring up Freedom for All, um, he's the one who, I'll let him tell you when you unpack a little bit more of this, Trash, but you really need to hear from him. It's incredibly important. He's going to add a lot to this conversation. Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate you.
Yeah, no. Thank you for the kind words. I'll look for him, get him up. Um, Listen, this is going to be very unpopular for many people who are on the quote unquote right, who are on our side. I can tell you from personal experience, and I guarantee you, Millie can say the same. I know she can because her and I talk about it. And there's some other people that have frustrations about people on our quote unquote side. I think there were a lot of people that were on our quote unquote, or at least on the right of the aisle, that were somewhat involved some way, somehow in this process. I've been calling it out for some time. It makes me very unpopular to do so. But I can tell you the frustration that Millie's had the last 4 years of getting this information to Congress people and having it not only die, but covered up. And we're talking about for people that are supposedly on our side. Even people who you would say are more America first minded, like, yep, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole. That shit, oh, that's too big. I can't handle it. I had several members of Congress. I'm not going to name the names. And I'm sure people are going to be disappointed. Name names, Aaron. I don't need to start political wars right now, but I'll tell you, there are some people, including large platforms, that are more well known within Congress or have access to intelligence committees or who would have access to subpoena classified information about certain names, certain individuals, certain organizations. They 100% would have access to this information. Yeah, it's too big. I can't touch that. I also know of a few people that participated and worked with some people on this. And so that's going to be the biggest frustration. And so I guess I'd like to be clear for those of you that are in our space for the first time. I'm an America First guy. I definitely want to put my country first. I definitely think that anybody that assaulted cops, that broke windows, that did any damage to the Capitol belong in jail. That is it. That is all. I don't give a shit. I'm out on all of that. That's not cool with me. But I also think we have a serious problem, and a lot of people are being implicated that shouldn't be, to create a broader political persecution or political message. And there are people that are on our side that are doing everything they can to get in the way of the January 6th pipe bomb investigation. They're getting in the way of this information, making it. I know for a fact there are subpoenas that came out from Oversight Committee that went to various places around the country, including Georgetown Law, regarding the Transition Integrity Project, where they intentionally left things out and intentionally did not subpoena people. And these are people that are not on our side. These are people that came out of the Obama administration. And the people that are blocking this are on our own side. So there's no illusion here that I think that anybody here is really a good guy. There are some on our side that are doing something about it. It's few and far between, but they are doing it. Um, but what I want is my country back, and I'd like to shrink the government. But that's my main goal, and I want the truth. And if the truth ends up smacking me in the face, that are people that I supported, that have been supporting for the last 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, end up being one of the biggest traitors, I'm naming their names too. Like, just to be clear, that's what this is really about. I'm tired of being gaslit. I have no brand to sell. I'm not doing any kind of gatekeeping. We have been gatekept. Millie has had her content stripped by large networks, and they removed her watermark and put out her content as if it was their own. And then they twisted what it was. It's dirty. So that's why we have these spaces, because you can't change this. You can't edit this. And sometimes we ruffle feathers. Anyway, I wanted to put that out there. This is really important for me to bring up. Thomas, you had your hand up. And then Corey, I'm coming to you. I got beef with the people you've aligned yourself with, but maybe we can find a common ground here. Maybe you can convince me that I've misunderstood, because I doubt it, but we'll get there. Thomas, go ahead.
Hey, I'm going to pass pretty quick. I wanted to point out Helena is a great person. She does a lot to help January Sixers. Millie, I know we don't really know each other, but I found your work 3 or 4 years ago whenever you first started putting it out, and I have been trying my best this entire time to every J Sixer I know. Helena knows a bunch of them too about it. Even send it to the lawyers and stuff, and I just don't know why none of them ever use this. I mean, at least 2 years ago, I am texting defendants' lawyers your video saying, "Hey, she's on to something," and it just never hear anything back. I'm gonna pass. I do want to point out, Trash, that you talked about Corey and you don't like him. There are people I'm getting messages that are J6ers or whatever who would like to speak, but they're not going to be a part of anything with these guys like Corey in here, these sedition hunters. So do what you will with that information. But I'm going to
No,
pass.
I'm well aware. I'm well aware. I would like to hear you out, Corey. I think a lot of us are educated enough to be able to push back. I'm not happy with a lot of the actions, but again, ops are ops. Let's see what happens. So, Corey, go ahead.
Hey, yeah. Thanks for letting me speak. I guess, I'm not necessarily here to try to change your mind, but I do have a few questions that I would love to kind of engage with you on, specifically about like the Ellipse rally actually heading to the Capitol in the first place. And the question there would be why on the application for the permit, they lied about there being a march to the Capitol in the first place, because that seems like a pretty big hindrance to actually putting together a successful security plan at the Capitol.
Well, that's actually, I'm glad you pointed that out, because the permits that were actually, so there's a few things that actually went down there. Matter of fact, I tell you what, I'm actually going to get people that were originally responsible for the original permit into this space, and they're probably going to talk a lot about it, because what ended up happening were there was a lot of bad actors, even on our side, that actually hijacked the message, hijacked the name, Stop the Steal, did not have permits, did not have stages, and then actually hijacked it, moved towards the Capitol early, and started rallying and pushing people. They were not actually affiliated with what was actually permitted. It was hijacked. It was for a couple of reasons. One was they were able to grift a bunch of money off of donations saying that they were affiliated with this group when they weren't. And two, I have no proof, but I have their past actions. Some of these people that did this, um, very nefarious and I would almost say subversive of our side. Millie, you can probably speak to this as well.
Yeah, so I was actually I was at the Ellipse. I was in the VIP area during Trump's speech. And I'm just going to say, like, the idea that people who were there around Trump to hear him speak were able to reach it um, before these first gates were being breached is ridiculous, because the congestion, I mean, you have to imagine, like, you've got, oh, I don't even know the numbers there, but I mean, just thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people, like, a sea of people who were so densely packed. I was like panicking, because even I left like, I left a little bit early because I felt like I was getting hypothermia. Like, Trump was still technically speaking when I left. And it took so dang long to try to get out of the initial like cluster. I mean, it was to the point where if you fell down, you ran the risk of probably being stomped on or something or stampeded. Like people were, when you're like body to body and you're being pushed and squeezed, that's how it was. So I find it kind of ridiculous that, one of the big talking points is, oh, people standing around there listening to Trump were then directed to go over there and then went subsequently based on what the Trump was saying and decided to go, breach the gates and this, that, and the other. If you look at the clock and the time, the people who were breaching the gates, they were already there and already meeting around the Capitol and weren't really the main, like they weren't really attending Trump's speech at the eclipse.
But yeah, correct. Yeah, Corey, go ahead. Follow-up question.
Yeah. I just wanted to say, yeah, I don't know, getting out of the VIP area, especially, like, I mean, the first time that Trump said to go to the Capitol was at 12:15, so there's a chance that somebody could have left early. But from what we've seen, Ryan Samsel, Paul Johnson, James Grant, those guys weren't in that area. So yeah, those aren't the guys that decided, at 1:10 p.m. to suddenly time travel to 12:53 and be at the gates. But I do think that there's an issue with the fact that, again, like the permit itself, like Trump telling them to go to the Capitol when there was no permit to do so, and therefore there probably wasn't much of a security response because they weren't prepared to have 30,000 people from the ellipse, which was just the permit size. There were more people than that, but they
I
weren't.
hear what you're saying, Corey, but at the same time, is there anything illegal of people peacefully marching to protest at the Capitol? Is that illegal to do?
No, certainly not. But the trespassing and after the fact, the not leaving restricted Capitol grounds, that's an issue, which I think Trump, as soon as he finished his speech, should have told them to leave the grounds. I think he could have saved a lot of people a lot of legal trouble by just telling them to leave.
And I think part of the problem is usually the Capitol is open, but because of COVID-19, they closed it. So usually people have the ability to go in, and I personally think that there was some people were confused on it, and when you saw that security and Capitol Police, literally, it's on video, were opening the gates and even in some instances waving people through and opening doors and waving people through, that gave some of these people the misunderstanding that they were supposed to be there or allowed to be there. So some people just kind of were there and not really aware of fully what was going on and the later implications that you know they would actually have to be facing because of that. The other thing was some people went through those doors because it was so congested that there wasn't an option of going the opposite direction, right? Like, so you have to kind of take into consideration some of these factors.
Another thing that's really bothered me, and I haven't had anybody on the left or anybody who pushes the January 6th narrative or who pushes, I mean, maybe for like you guys that are, sedition hunters that are hunting down people, combing through all this video and photos and trying to add more people to the DOJ's warrant list. One thing I haven't had explained to me is why somebody like Michael Teeter was the executive director of the 65 Project. 65 Project was the group of people who were going after any attorney that representing Trump in election challenge cases and trying to get them disbarred in their respective state. Jenna Ellis is well known for this. Many people are. But that same Michael Teeter who worked under David Brock, who originally started Media Matters, whom had a meeting in the Obama White House in 2017 when they rolled out Crew. So we're talking Norm Eisen on the lawfare instance. We're still seeing Norm do his dirty shit now. Crew, David Brock, Media Matters, American Bridge, Share Blue, which became Act Blue, American Bridge being a PAC. How they raised all this money to create a lawfare apparatus, a censorship and a media ad attack apocalypse infrastructure, i.e., Media Matters, lawfare, Norm Eisen, and Crew. Why that same Michael Teeter, who then rolled out Facts First USA as the executive director, who was essentially the fact checker for the left wing media. I mean, to the point where CNN got so lazy they would actually just put uh, facts first fact checks on their reporting, coming straight out of the same group. Why Michael Teeter would be the attorney of record for Ray Epps against Fox News? Why would he do that? See, if Ray Epps was such a patriot and such a Trump supporter, and he was harmless, saying we just need to go into the Capitol. We need to go into the Capitol. So much so that you actually needed to file charges against Baked Alaska, who was in that same video calling Ray Epps a Fed. Ray Epps whispering in people's ears, then they do the first breach. Why would Michael Teeter, a Democrat operative, want to be representing Ray Epps? I haven't had any answers to that question because I have all that document. I have all those documents as well. They filed
But
the
that's the same law firm who did Russia for Hillary Clinton. You know,
100%.
I just
Same
want
one.
everybody to know, as Corey, this is you, Corey. Corey can watch a video of Roseanne Boylan being struck in the head with a stick and say he doesn't call it murder. If you want to judge his level of sincerity, just for the record.
Sure. I just wanted to put things on the record while we're here. Go ahead, Corey.
Hey, yeah, with regard to Ray Epps, I mean, I think that seems a little bit obvious. They're going after Fox News. I don't think they really particularly care about Ray Epps. I think more so it's trying to strike at Fox News. Don't you think that would be at least a possibility?
No, and I definitely think I definitely don't think that the FBI would consider him a confidential human source, ignore him for 2 years, and then because politically it's not working, all of a sudden file charges. And then Ray Epps goes after Fox News in April after he's gone almost 3 years without any kind of communication. And
Hey,
on those following days, how he communicated with them essentially was basically an informant and then disappeared. And everyone's calling Ray Epps a Fed. He's not. I think he was an operative. And I think that you can point to what his wife's activities were. We can go into that. I'm not really trying to go into Ray Epps. I'm simply just highlighting a lot of the real big inconsistencies that everyone's been gaslit on. Yet I have the receipts for all of this. And so this is kind of a thing where I'm like, all right, we're going to flex these receipts while we have the audience. And I would like to get some pushback. And again, I think we can all handle this. So that's why you're up here, Corey. I appreciate you've been respectful. You haven't been respectful to people, I'm sure. I'm sure there's a lot of people pissed at you. I'm saying at least you've engaged with me. I'm willing to do that because I don't want to be in an echo chamber. So, Thomas, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
hey, I get too emotional, man. I could talk for hours about all this. I don't want to hog your space. And you just said to Corey basically what I would have anyway. So let's just go with the flow a little bit.
Right on. So let me kind of reset the room a little bit. So my theory, my whole thing started on. I just it just feels like a lot of this was all politically advantageous for a lot of people. They all took advantage of it, but there was an op that was set up way before, and that was kind of the premise of this. Millie, should we back it up a little bit for provenance on the space and actually kind of go into this Feds for Democracy Now / Sunrise Zoom calls, maybe break down the videos on the counts, how they had the entire thing gamed out up until inauguration day and how it's pretty suspect and how it all connected on a timeline together? Maybe we back it up that way.
Sure, yeah, I think we can do that, and also kind of pulling things forward to the Pelosi tapes and what's going on right now in the J6 trials.
I think so too. And that's the thing. And so right now we've got, I think, the question of the 1512, um, the Fisher case up at SCOTUS. I know we're expecting that by the end of June, and I think it's going to change a lot of cases. And that's why I've always been concerned about how fast tracked some of these cases were and how slow walked some of the other ones were. I have some questions about that, but maybe that's for another space.
That decision might come out tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Trash.
Yeah, so we're waiting on right now at SCOTUS. We're waiting on the immunity question that Jack Smith put up there. We're waiting on the Fisher decision, which is the 1512. We're waiting on the Missouri v. Biden censorship case, CISA, White House, CDC, Surgeon General, whether or not they can actually weigh whether or not the temporary injunction on censoring American speech through these official offices is allowed or not, which the Fifth Circuit had ruled that they're not. And so we're waiting on that decision. I think we're also waiting on the Chevron deference decision. So there's a lot up there. I'm not sure which one's coming where. I'm seeing some people say that, oh, no, it's been leaked. We know it's coming. We know 1512 Fisher's coming. We know immunity's coming. I'm not so sure of that. But there are four major decisions at SCOTUS right now. So we need to pay attention.
So I do want to kind of at some point though go around and get people's take on whether or not they think Nancy Pelosi should be held responsible for what happened on January 6th. So I do want to kind of go around the room on
Me
that
too.
one,
I'd like to hear it.
given that in the audio she does say that that they're at fault for it, right? Like, so
I think
Actually,
so.
matter of fact, why don't we do that right now and kind of give me a break for a second, and then I think we should do that. Because I think you guys know. I think you
all
guys
right,
know.
let's do that while you're compiling things together for us to do a deep review of the Sunrise stuff. So, all right. So I guess I see that we have like a kind of a different some differing opinions and viewpoints in here. So I'm going to first go to Helena. What do you think? Do you think Nancy Pelosi should be held responsible for what happened on January 6th?
You know, Millie, I'm on the same page with V. Rosen. You will never convince me that Nancy Pelosi was not the architect of this. I truly believe that. I think that she was definitely plotting and planning. I was in that hearing when they deposed Chief Son, and no less than 4 or 5 times he kept saying over and over again that Pelosi would not return his phone calls. And it's like she it just seems like, I don't know, her not having the National Guard there, and Muriel Bowser was a part of that too when President Trump had ordered that. I'm just, I just, you can't ever convince me otherwise. I truly believe that she was definitely at the top of planning Jan 6. I think now she's on a CYA Cover Your Ass tour since this video has come out, and I don't know why it took so long for this video to come out. And maybe Freedom for All can speak to that a little bit. My ex space is doing really weird things, so I can't even see if he's up in the speaker box right now. But I am also very interested in hearing everybody else's thoughts on this. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess never mind. We don't have anyone on the space
Oh, that's
anymore that
my
has a
fault. I
different
have both of those assholes blocked.
So, all right. So I'll speak to this. I
I
would like to
win,
speak.
bitches. I
Listen,
yeah,
win.
listen, listen.
ruined my fun, man. I was gonna completely freaking just destroy these people
Right.
with
Well,
facts.
that's what we
Like,
were doing, Millie, and that's what I wanted to do. And like I was being very explicit, and I said, I don't like you. I don't like what you've done. I don't like who you are. But I'll hear you out. And then we just dismantled every talking point, and that was the point. We have to be able to do that. I know you guys are pissed at me for it. Trust me, that's what I wanted to do. Anybody in this space that heard it, they understood that that's exactly what I was doing. Um, we have to be able to confront these narratives. We have to.
yeah, no, if we don't confront them, they're just going to be spewing them and never be confronted for it.
Oh,
So, this is the thing. When people with differing opinions come into your space, they're following their audience is going to be watching what they're doing as well. And so, when they're out there spewing false narratives to their people, this gives us an opportunity to refute their bullshit and actually educate people about the information that we have that shows a different side of the story.
okay, I love both of you, right? And I agree, and I'm totally about dispelling narratives, okay? But those two people in particular are going around as paid agitators, trying to catch up our people and derail spaces, derail conversations. Like those two in particular are the bad actors that we are talking about. Like, I've watched them do it like 1,000 times in every room. They come in and they freaking try to attack people. They use the same talking points. They use the same narratives, right? And they're not even arguing from a genuine standpoint, Trash. And I know that's something like you talk about all the time, is that like you have no problem debating anybody as long as they're being genuine about it. And I truly don't believe those two are being genuine, and I'm totally willing to give up the co-host and leave so those two idiots can come back. But
Well,
yeah.
so I'm noticing what happened here. I was just talking about Corey. Corey wasn't doing it. He was trying to present questions and narratives, and he wasn't really misdirecting. We were able to actually work through it methodically. But I see that Jared was here. I don't give a fuck about Jared. Jared can go fuck himself. That guy's a liar. He does nothing intellectually honest. He does nothing to actually engage intellectually at all. He's only there to disrupt and disengage. But Corey was not being that way. Now, granted, I know there's a lot of people with January 6th that feel differently. Listen, there's nobody more that hates Midas Touch patriot takes, sedition hunters, Occupy Democrats, all of these clowns. I hate them more than anything because they are dishonest. It's lies, it's propaganda, it's spin. I just wanted to see, right? I just wanted to see. And we were able, Millie and I were actually able to dismantle a lot of what Corey was talking about. Jared, fuck Jared. I don't give a shit about Jared.
The difference is look, when I go into these other spaces and I'm there as a speaker, I'm not ever given the opportunity to fully present this material. And if I could, I would be interested in actually seeing how these leftists that have been spewing this J6 narrative, like what are they going to say to that? How would they refute it? And if so, if this is going to be something that, they're caught off guard with, does that mean they're going to start looking in more to it? Like, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
so it's kind of one of those things where I've never actually debated any of these people in another space on this material because, quite frankly, anytime I try to bring this stuff up, all the other hosts just kind of, okay, yeah, we're not going to talk about that right now. That's not the topic of this space or whatever I get.
No, 100%. I agree. I figured out what happened here. I don't care about Jared. Jared, he'll never engage with us, Millie. Genuinely, I think Corey was doing it. I don't care whether he believes it or not. I wanted the other people listening to hear it. But let me recenter the space here a little bit now that we're back on track here. Producer Jim, thank you for being here. I appreciate you grabbing the mic. What's your take on this? Because I know Dan's take on it because I talked about Dan's take in the beginning, and his and I's take are similar. Mine just goes further. But what's your take on this, Jim?
Well, I mean, it's similar to exactly what Dan talks about on the show. I think the big question, the thing that shows the whole thing was most possibly or probably orchestrated in some way or another, is the whole January 6th pipe bomber thing. The fact that they don't have an identity of this person yet, and they're still rounding up 75-year-old grandmothers 3 years later. The whole pipe bomb thing, Dan broke that down meticulously, and I mean, with the help of Darren Beatty and Julie Kelly as well. And the fact that they have, you see them making a cell phone call. They have the tower records, the missing Secret Service texts from that time, because they just happened to be doing some type of upgrade or services on cell phones at that time, and all the information allegedly got wiped out. This is one of the keys to this thing. The whole Pelosi thing, I don't think that she was in on anything. I, I'm still wondering, and I asked this question to Dan when we were talking about this the other day, and I think that was, if I looked correctly, that was your initial tweet that started this whole Spaces tonight. But the the uh, the whole Pelosi thing, the question I had was, why did she have a film crew following her around the entire day? I know it was her daughter and everything, but obviously they were set to record a moment for something. I don't know what it is. I don't have any idea. I do think it's funny, as you all stated earlier, that in the Netflix documentary, which I did not see, that particular clip of her taking responsibility wasn't in the documentary. So look, there. My take is there's something going on. I don't know what it is. I don't know who's responsible. All I know is the entire year of 2020, with COVID and everything else, was totally orchestrated towards making sure Donald Trump did not get in office again, not win re-election. The odds of an incumbent not winning re-election are very low. It almost never happens, and it did in this case. So I don't even know what to say about it anymore.
Well,
It's
and
just,
Jim, look, let me help. Let me color in the lines with you because I agree with you. And Millie and Helena and a lot of people in this space feel differently. And I want to get Jen's take on this as well. I'm not saying that Nancy didn't know anything. I think that she saw a political opportunity. I also think maybe deep down she even wanted something to happen. But I also think that clip that had to have been subpoenaed by the subcommittee, that was not put in the documentary, that then was had to send to them based on subpoena. Some people posit right here, right now, that was a CYA moment. I think it's part of it. but I don't think it's the bigger picture of it. And the reason that it really bothers me is something that you brought up that I haven't brought up yet, is the fact that all the cameras, based on Darren Beatty and Dan and Julie's reporting and many other people, the cameras were just in the wrong position the whole time, and
Right.
magically all the Secret Service's phones swapped out the next day, and none of that data was recoverable. The fact that we can't get any of the traffic cameras where we can actually backtrace the pipe bomb suspect back to their car, back to a general public transit, and see where they went. That's an obvious thing that you should be able to do. The cameras were corrupted. There was problem with the cell phone data in the area, so we can't track GPS. All the text messages and all the phones from Secret Service were swapped out the following day during in the middle of an investigation of supposedly the most dangerous time and triple 9/11s that ever happened in the history of the world, and it was worse than 5 Hiroshimas and all these things that they've been talking about. Yet all of this stuff is missing, and so that part, coupled with at the highest levels of government, we're talking SecDef, we're talking Army Secretary, we're talking directives that came down, we're talking Muriel Bowser in her small capacity in DC, because again, she doesn't have much authority over the Capitol grounds, but she's got surrounding areas, and all of these things, were they all coordinated? My my
They
my
all
my
denied. They all denied protection. Bowser and Pelosi both denied.
yes, of
Millie
course they did, but like
Millie took the power away from Walker. You know,
yeah.
so it's like all these things happened. We know that they happened. You have Walker testifying on Capitol Hill that this was highly unusual that they would do these kinds of things. So I don't know who's responsible. I don't know who's behind it, but I know there was an effort to make sure that this guy did not get back in office.
Well, we know who was behind it because, I was able to infiltrate these left wing groups who were working together in a combined action to subvert President Trump. And, these groups referred to themselves as the Swamp. It consisted of thousands of federal bureaucrats who were working with outside protest groups like BLM, Sunrise Movement, varying Antifa groups like Extinction Rebellion, climate change type groups, and like Refuse Fascism. So these groups were all working together on what are called spokes councils. So a spokes council is when you have a contingent of a bunch of these leftist organizations where they all come together in a combined action and each send a representative, which is their spoke, to head the meeting and to represent their group. But that doesn't exclude all these other people, in the higher ups from attending the meetings as well. But what they did was they were essentially reading off of the TIP report, which was the simulation exercises pertaining to the election. And they were running their own scenario exercises over Zoom with their people. And so they would have the leftist protester groups running the simulation exercises as to what each group would do and in each different scenario and their resources. And they would rate it on a point system like it's a game. And then they also had the federal bureaucrats in our government working together. I mean, some of these people having national security backgrounds, clearance, top secret clearance, former Obama staffers, Democrats, I guess staffers as well,
Here,
people who former lieutenant colonels of the Air
I'll play
Force,
Millie. I'll play it.
University.
I'll play part of this. I've got it queued up, Millie. I'll play a little bit of it. I'm not the Feds for Democracy Now. I know that's what you're talking about. But I've got what these horizontally aligned affinity groups and DHS contractors and people within their government were planning. I mean, here's their own words, and here's Lisa Fithian, the same Lisa Fithian that was identified taking over the building at Columbia University. Here's their own words. Listen to this. Just listen to this. Fifth, we're going to shut down the White House.
Matt, the White House, and know every access point so we knew we could blockade it.
On the 6th, we're going to shut down larger parts of Washington, D.C.
We've been working on a target map and a framework for scenario. So where are all the police stations? Where are all the key government buildings? Who are the Trump boosters?
members of Congress that are coming in. We're going to meet them at the airports or at Union Station and send them back to where they came from until we deal with the situation that we're in. We are going to be in a crisis, but we want it to be one that we are creating. Whoever's got the guns can win. Let's take over the buildings. If there are people that are willing to do that, we should support them. Get ready to shut your city down on the 4th or the 5th.
Yeah. So I mean, again, so just that's all of these people that have been named that Millie was able to infiltrate that are talking about exactly what they were doing on January 6th and what they intended to do. And so this has always been my thing. And I've talked to Darren. Julie hasn't talked to me. She's only talked to me about some things, in the Eileen Cannon case. Not really much. Dan's gone here, but he's only going on off information that Massey gave him or Beatty gave him that he's gotten, or Julie Kelly. But it goes further because they had the entire map of DC. They had where the police stations were. They knew where all the RNC and Trump affiliation centers were. They had the entire map of the White House, the entire map of the Capitol building, entire DC, where they would go. And I just find it interesting that the response center to the January 6th pipe bombs was just basically put in between where where the DNC was, which is highly suspect, and the trash can near the Capitol Hill Grill, which is not really the RNC, even though it's just easier to say RNC, DNC, but it was right smack dab in the center. And all these people had organized with all these, they were on these calls. And
Let's remember too, though, these weren't real pipe bombs, despite what they say. These
right.
were practice pipe bombs that they use in training. It's obvious they have images of the training
Well,
bombs, and
Jim,
as compared to these, this pipe bomb supposedly had a what is it, a 1 hour timer
yeah,
that
60
was set
minute egg timer.
right set 20 minutes before, but allegedly it was placed 17 hours before. None of it makes sense whatsoever. The whole thing, and as Dan has said, that was a plan B. That if whatever happened at the Capitol didn't happen, then they were going to use that as the premise to attack the right, attack the Trump supporters, blame Trump. You know,
And that's exactly what these groups were doing, because they had the DNC headquarters and the RNC headquarters, the exact headquarters that were targeted with those pipe bombs. They had them as the exact locations of their targets in their map. And they specifically were talking about how they had scenario plans for everything. So what they said was, if Trump wasn't going to try to concede, they were going to focus their efforts on the Republicans, right? But they also had a plan. Well, what if Biden doesn't? What if Biden's starting to become weak and he doesn't push back hard enough, or maybe Biden starts to concede? Biden doesn't, challenge Trump not conceding. So they had a plan to shift gears on the Democrats as well, if the Democrats weren't doing what they wanted them to do as well. So the reason why there would be, in my mind, supposedly this pipe bomb at the RNC and pipe bomb at the DNC, whether it was a real explosive or not, the idea would be to cause fear and terror and direct that in any which way, which was politically advantageous for them to
right?
do,
Yes.
target each side and say, we're not going to put up with you at you Democrats conceding, because they specifically talk about this in their videos. They talk about these plans of, we're going to turn on the Democrats if they don't do what we want.
And the fact that we don't even know the name of the guy who discovered the pipe bomb, this is another thing. We don't know that guy's name, but we know that Kamala Harris was at the DNC. There's a pipe bomb there, and he found it to prevent it from going off and evacuated Kamala Harris from there. This guy should be a national hero because he saved the vice president-elect's life. But we don't know who he is. We don't know anything about him. We didn't even know that Kamala Harris was at the DNC until just recently. So, look, there's way too many questions on this whole thing. The more you see of it, if I watched the Epic Times documentary, the minute by minute, and it's really fascinating. And if you watch that from all the different camera angles that they show, the how isolated this quote unquote attack on the Capitol was in a very small area, while other people were being escorted in, walk through the Capitol, and the fact that even though they got close to the Capitol, breaching the first two with the whole Ray Epps thing, the they got close enough to the Capitol, but they weren't rioting until the police started firing on them and throwing those grenades. Nobody was rioting until that started to happen. And you rile people up like that, and crap's going to happen. Another thing, and I just told this to Dan the other day, there were how many hundred Trump rallies and that he had, and before and both after, and gatherings of the right, but only one time something like this happened. Doesn't that seem odd to you?
Well, and it does, producer Jim. So Jim, Jen, you were there also. So Millie talked about this earlier because she was in VIP during that time, and there's no way, and that was the case that was made on the timing. But Jen, you were there as also, well, I mean, to an extent. And I don't know, what's your take on this? You've had your hand up for a while. You're my co-host. I don't want to leave you out, so go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. As many of you know, I was one of the lead organizers of all three DC rallies that were legally permitted, and one of the lead organizers of all of the bus tours that went around the nation post-election. And there's a couple things like I've always found interesting, right? The first two rallies we did, right, we had the same exact program. We started with a rally at Freedom Plaza. Then we had a march to the Capitol or up to the Supreme Court, where we then had another stage. Supreme Court had a second court. On January 6th, however, at the Ellipse, there was no planned march like going into it, right? Like we were not planning to have a march, and we were actually, when the permits were given, right? It said that we were not allowed to have a march. That we were all going to have to stay at the Ellipse the entire time. And we planned like 14 hours. Everything was hurt,
Hey,
right?
Jen.
She's
So
rubber
that
Hey,
I
really
found
bad.
hey,
interesting.
Jen. Hey, Jen. I think you've been rubber banding. I thought it was
Yeah.
just me, but I think it's you. Are you on Wi-Fi?
Let me log out. I'll
All
be
right,
right
cool,
back.
cool, cool. Because it like cut out everything. I thought it was just me, and I was like, nope, this is her.
Yeah, no, I was like, all right, we can't even hear what she's saying. But yeah, so here's the other thing I would like to bring up. So in the videos with Lisa Fithian, which I have a 2 hour plus long video of Lisa Fithian doing and conducting a training session, which if you don't know who Lisa Fithian is yet, which, maybe you don't, I don't know. She gets around though. She was recently, she went viral, I guess you could say, because she was instructing the university students that have been doing these university takeovers over the Palestine protests. She was caught on video instructing them on taking over the buildings. And people were really woken up to this idea of like, who's this older lady instructing these, I guess, students and outside protesters on how to take over these buildings? Right? It speaks to that this is not just the organic actions of university students, which of course it's not, but that's how the media is wanting that to be perceived. But Lisa Fithian is a skilled Antifa trainer, protest artist, I guess you could say. She's a logician on being a protest coordinator. But she hosted a training session. She was part of these combined actions, these spokes councils. Oh, I think you're off mute, Trash. You got a hot mic.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I had to reset. I had to hard close because all the glitches. I think I fixed them all.
Okay. So she actually, in this 2+ hour training session, was training these Antifa to take over the buildings. I mean, literally, the training was about taking over government buildings. She specifically mentioned January 6th by date. She said, we should just take over the buildings and break the windows and get in there and which you saw part of that in, I think, the clip that Aaron played earlier. But there's obviously much more in the long form of the video. And one thing that really stands out actually in the video is there's a part where she is talking about the National Guard. And she's talking about, we should try to talk to Democrats in power and get them to commit to not calling in the National Guard. And that, like, she went on a very long diatribe about this and how, maybe essentially when they have their civil disobedience or protests, which we all know is riots or whatever they do, that they would have already had these Democrats, which I kind of envisioned it as governors, but you could see how it could be applied in this context with, Nancy Pelosi and these others that really blockaded Trump's requests and, Capitol Police Chief Son's request to have the National Guard there. So that's, I think, extremely relevant to what happened with January 6th.
No, I think it is too, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. I've got those receipts pulled up as well. I'm going to get through the hands. Jen, you were rugging out. Let's start over. So you were talking about how you had organized some movements into DC, and you were there January 6th.
Yeah, so we were the March for Trump, did all 3 DC rallies. We were the permit holders for all 3 DC rallies that were legally permitted. Thomas, you got something?
All good. Go ahead.
Okay. So a couple observations, right? So on January 5th, right, there we had I think it was called the Prayer to Save America, right? And at that event, there were like 5 separate events run by different groups. In the morning, I get a feverish call from Grace at RSBN, who had been embedded with us the entire time. So from the time we started the tour at Trump Doral at the end of November, until we ended that tour in January at Washington, D.C., they were with us the whole time. So Grace calls me and she's like, hey, there's an agitator in the press pin. I need you to come over with security immediately. And this is when we were at Freedom Plaza. So we rush over with security, and it's this guy, and I still have his picture. He was completely like black blocked out, had a jean jacket on, and he had like the tactical knuckles, like the brass knuckles on. He had ski goggles on, and he had a hood on, so you couldn't make anything out of who this person was. And we get over there, and he's trying to start a riot from inside the press pen with the patriots that are standing on the other side of the press pen. So we ended up having to throw this guy out, it was either CBS News or ABC or NBC. One of the 3 of them claimed this guy as their cameraman, and we were like, "Wait, what? The guy dressed in black bloc, like that's your cameraman?" Okay, so we leave. Maybe like 10:30 that night, we're up in the Willard because we had been staying at the Willard overlooking Freedom Plaza. And I get another call from Grace, and she's like, Jen, the guy is back. And this time he's really trying to start a riot. We need to get this guy out of here. So again, we had to run down with security, grab this guy. And this time we had to walk him literally a half a mile with security out of the area because the crowd was ready to jump this guy after what he was doing from inside the press pen. Then I saw what happened on January 6th, and I'm like, you know what? Those cameras that were carrying everything live, they just so happened to be set up at all the strategic places where the windows were broken, where people were going in, except nothing was supposed to be happening at the Capitol that day except for the vote that was happening at the floor. So why the hell did you have cameras set up in the bottom of the Capitol building? Another thing I'd like to point out, I've always said that we need to pull every single press pass, every single media pass, and every single video pass that was given out on January 6th, because that will tell one hell of a story. Who had the right to be filming inside the Capitol that day? Because I've gotten more than one report that there were full-fledged camera crews set up inside the Capitol. Why the hell was that? That's
Yep. And I only
Why
know,
was that?
yeah, and I only know one citizen journalist that was actually inside that was completely honest. Matter of fact, if you guys want to join me on our weekly space at Tenant Media, Taylor Hanson, who was right there when what happened with Ashley Babbitt, he absolutely was allowed in there. But otherwise, there were badged, privileged camera crews in there. I'm not talking about like Taylor Hanson being part of the crowd coming in and filming it with his press pass. That's one thing. And Taylor captured some wild stuff, including not maybe not what Sullivan got because he was right next to her, but he was right there when they were rushing around the corner, going up the steps, and then what happened in the with Michael Bird in the hallway. But yeah, aside from like citizen journalists, even Jaden X or John Sullivan, right? We have our questions. We can talk about him all day, right? Why was his brother connected with one group? He's with the other, and they're all him and Jade are celebrating.
Wait,
That's
Trash.
yeah.
Can I just finish
Wait,
real quick?
well, let me finish real quick
Okay,
before
go.
I implicate
Okay.
Taylor. Before I implicate Taylor, he's not. He's been cleared. He but again, he was right there as well. And so, if you guys want to join our spaces, Tenant Media, we did one last night on foreign influence in elections. But anyway, long story boring. No, there were people that were actually on a guided tour around the Capitol that were setting up shots, including Alexandria Pelosi, that were making these shots, and we had them we can even find this if you go to the Rumble channel from Oversight. You can pull all that video footage and you can find this for yourself. I know I did. I did when they started uploading the stuff about 6 months ago. And so you can find this where there actually are protected camera crews to catch every moment, including Alexandria Pelosi. But go ahead, Jen. Go ahead.
Yeah, so after I had to testify in front of the J6, I got publicly subpoenaed on the news, had to testify in front of the J6 committee for 4 hours, where they asked me the most ridiculous questions. I actually went and joined President Trump's legal team, officially, his official legal team. And when you start to go through the footage, frame by, and Thomas, I see you down there, okay? Frame by frame by frame by frame, and you pick out one person to follow, right? Don't look at all the other stuff. Just pick out one person and follow that person through the crowd, right? What you're going to begin to see is there are media people all throughout the crowd. They all have the same photo lenses. They all have gas masks. They all have tactical gear. Now, why would the press? We all 3 times we had been to DC, it was peaceful. The only violence came from people attacking Trump supporters. So why would you bring gas masks that day? I don't know. Then you start to see the people who are in the crowd with the earpieces, who are talking from the scaffolding down to the people in the crowd and directing people in the crowd to do certain things and telling people to go there, pointing out this person, pointing out that one. And they all just seem to be in strategic locations. Then they're flanking each other as they're going up the crowd. Then they're attacking people as they're in the crowd. Why are these stories never told? Why are we led to believe that this all was that Trump supporters did it? It wasn't. You see it with your own eyes. Who were the people who had the permits outside the Capitol that day? Because you know what the people holding the permits were told? We were told that no other permits were going to be given out in DC that day, that we were not allowed to have anything else happen. Dustin even tried to set up a stage up at the Capitol, and he was told, absolutely not. You're not allowed to do that. Why? The people who had set up all 3 rallies, who held rallies all over the country in 27 states we went to. You're telling me that they weren't allowed to do it, but for some reason y'all were handing out permits up at the Capitol? Who are those groups? Who's behind those groups? Because you know what I see when I see those groups? I see very like if I were leftist, right? And I'm gonna pick a good Republican name for this group. Glory to God be Jesus Christ. Like it just seems like so odd. And the fact that they were so adamant to us, the Parks Department, telling us that there were going to be no permits, I just find it odd that there were permits handed out at the Capitol.
Absolutely.
I agree with Everything you just said, Jen, especially about the footage. There's eighty
The other
thousand
thing
dollar
that's really,
cameras in the crowd that day, right in the middle of a riot, right? Um,
if you remember, Jen, when looking through the video footage, there were a lot of people dressed in black bloc. And to the point where, I was going through, because I was working with Rudy compiling stuff, because Rudy was one of the few people who stayed behind post January 6th, and was compiling a bunch of footage. And I was just kind of, I was that repository essentially, and so I was just being handed all this stuff, and we were skimming through, going through all this stuff, and I'm just like, look at how many people were wearing these face masks or these hoods, and then you had some people who clearly were in black bloc uniform, which we know that is how Antifa dresses. They dress in black bloc. They teach it. They instruct it. It's a specific look, and you recognize it when you see it. The other thing what I thought was really interesting was there's one girl, which I'll have to pull up the picture and find it and put it out, but there's a photograph I have of a lady who looks like an Antifa. She looks like one of those types that's practically wearing gauges in the ears. You know what I'm talking about? And she had some kind of a weird thing, like it's kind of like headwear. You would think like glasses, but it wasn't. That was metal, and it went right along her cheek, up over her nose, and along her other cheek. And what that did was is when I tried to run her face through facial recognition software, it would not pull her up. So what I found was that there are different types of headwear that you can buy and wear that'll actually disrupt and prevent you from being identified with facial recognition technology, despite the fact that I could see your eyes, I could see your mouth, I could see your face. It disrupted the scanning. So there were people there who were identified and who looked like Antifa. There are many instances that have been documented.
Millie, I hate to jump in trash, but I just have to. Let me just tell you my story real quick, a short version. I was there that day and I recorded the very first people to break windows at the plaza, the Lower West Plaza, where the tunnel is. And I also filmed part of Ray Epps' team that day. They won't arrest me. Okay, I've testified, I've done all this stuff. If you have facial recognition software, I got about 7 or 8 people that you can identify that sedition hunters won't touch, the FBI won't take my footage. And there has to be, Helena knows, I've been screaming this to anybody, my friends, anybody in the movement. I've been saying this forever. I have this footage, and I'm one of the only people who they won't arrest. I'm on footage that's been seen over 100 million times around the world that triggered the biggest investigation into the history of the FBI, and everybody around me is going to prison for 10 to 15 years, but they will not even mention my name. So I have this footage. I filmed it myself that day. And then I was beside Roseanne Boylan when they murdered her. I was trapped beside her. So I have this. I would love to give it to people. This is what I've devoted my life to. If you have, I don't have facial recognition software.
Millie, you there?
Yeah, I'm there. There's stuff available on the internet. If I'll follow, well, it says I'm following you. If you want to DM me, I could send you some really good stuff that you can use out there.
Millie, I tell you what I'll do. I'm just going to send you all my footage from that day, and I'll send you a couple of timestamps for where you can look. Okay.
All right. Wow, man, that's why I love these spaces. That's why I love these spaces, especially when you're actually talking to people that are competent and know what they're doing, and the people that were there that can actually speak expertly to these things, and it transcends any kind of tribal politics or whatever. Like, let me reset the space for a moment. So, Pelosi tapes come out, and again, I still think that this is a sticking point for some of us. I think there's been a great case to be made that Nancy Pelosi was at the center of all of this. I think a lot of you guys have made that case. I think Helena made that case. I think a lot of people have. I'm not convinced, and I'm not convinced for a couple of reasons. And I'll say this: it could have been a cover your ass moment when she realized that either A, number one, she took advantage of a political situation and it got out of hand, and she participated early on thinking it was business as usual and we can exaggerate this in the media and we can talk about this for the next 6 months or 2 years and didn't really know what was happening in real time, or she was at the center of all this and orchestrated this. I'm not convinced that Nancy Pelosi has that kind of power to deal with the Secretary of Defense and the Army Secretary. That's not something that I feel like there's a connection there. She is in control of Capitol Police. She is in control of basically bringing National Guard to the National Mall. She does have that authority, but I'm not convinced that she was at the center of all of it. I think she was at the center of some of it, and I think she's complicit. But I think there was a much bigger op running, and that's why I brought in the conversation of the Sunrise Zoom calls, Lisa Fithian, all these people, what happened with the military, and the major general who had testified in front of Hawley, in front of Cruz. Dan Bongino put that out a couple days ago as well. Kind of reminded me and kind of got my thinking going on it again. So that's kind of where we're at. I'm at an impasse with it because I think that in order for you to achieve Secret Service getting new phones, all of the cameras being off record, no cell phone data and GPS data being available. At the same time, being able to coordinate with the Department of Defense, preventing the Major General who was in control of DC's National Guard, changing the rules the day before. All of these things happening at the same time of a breakdown. I'm not convinced that Nancy Pelosi is even remotely competent to do that.
Well,
I,
Trash, you know what really, really, really bothers me is the fact, okay, the sergeant at arms that day, right? He was supposed to go testify. The day before he goes to testify, he's getting out of an Uber in Washington, D.C., and he's gunned down in the middle of the road. I know that's what happened. I will put my hand on the Bible and I would testify to that. That is what happened to that man. If you go and you Google it now, it says that he died of natural causes the day before he was supposed to testify as the sergeant of arms on January 6th. Now, you're telling me that's by accident. No, that is a cover up. And you're trying to make us all look stupid. But I know for goddamn sure that man was gunned down in the middle of the road.
It's highly possible. Yes, all of those things. And people ask me about yoga not a pit. Like, listen, let me be clear about something. I'm not trying to take control of a narrative. I'm literally trying to hash this out with people that I respect on their intelligence that also were involved and to have a different take on this. Just to be clear, I know I have a loud voice. I know I'm hosting this space, but I'm not trying to create a narrative here. I'm saying that I have a theory and I want to get the best people that I have access to that can come in and refute, challenge, offer a different perspective, people's opinions that I respect. I'm not trying to plant a narrative. I'm trying to ask the right questions. And
Exactly. And you have to kind of think out loud sometimes when you're doing this type of research. You have to try to think about what are the possibilities, what are the different scenarios, what could have happened, what do we know? We got to put information together that we've gathered and try to find out what exactly happened. And so we have to be looking at all these different clues and things that we're finding. And some clues may kind of push and lead down one path and others might kind of lead down another, but at the end of the day, once you've fully gathered enough, usually you can kind of come to a pretty clear conclusion as to which direction it's going to go. But I think we're still, we've been doing a lot of fact finding and gathering on this subject for quite a while, but obviously this tape with Nancy Pelosi recently coming out, it kind of it has us wondering, and it's new information that we can enter into what we've already collected, and we need to kind of see where that goes. And I do agree, like I'm super torn over this issue the same way I think you are, Aaron. Like to me, I think it could be both, like it could be either or situation. But then there's the part of me, like, my intuition and my gut that just goes, there's no way they didn't know. Like there's like common sense, the commonsensical part of me, the part that like may be prone to being gaslit is kind of like, okay, maybe Nancy didn't know, right? But the part of me that's like, more grounded in, I guess, my intuition is saying, how do they not know? Because if you recall, the DC mayor, she called in the National Guard, and she actually had the whole city of DC started boarding up windows, and there were all of these. If you remember the time period, you guys could go and use like when you use like Google search or something, which I know Google's been really good at removing stuff and censoring stuff. But last time I did that, I put in the search tools and I looked in that exact date parameter time period, look before January 6th in that time period, like January 5th or so. And what you find is you find all of these articles about DC bracing for riots, unrest, calling in the National Guard, boarding, businesses were closing down, hotels were closing down, they're boarding up windows. So there's that part of me that's like, well, how could they have not known that there was always going to be a possibility of some kind of civil unrest, given how contentious this election had been? It could have gone either which way. And like the way I was thinking about it beforehand, and I mean, I'd like to hear your guys' opinion on it too, but like gearing up for, going into January 6th, we all kind of had a sense or a feeling like either which way this went, there's going to be, some bit of chaos or rioting. And I even thought that maybe if it went in the favor of Trump, that there was always a possibility, obviously, of the Antifa and the BLM groups rioting. And I know people were kind of bracing and preparing themselves for the thought of that as well. And that we know that Antifa was bussing themselves in. They were staying at hotels. We have that intel that there were groups of Antifa in DC, and as well as John Sullivan and his Antifa groups. And so we know that they were there, and there was always a possibility of craziness. We saw with the inauguration of President Trump how that got crazy and these Antifa groups rioted. So how could Nancy Pelosi and them not have known? Like, to me, it seems like they're playing stupid, playing dumb.
Well, again, this is yes, I agree, but this is where I land. I'm like, Pelosi being the like leftist lunatic, I'm not going to actually play this through. This seems to be a political win for me if I can make Trump supporters look bad. Therefore, I'm going to go along with this. She's not directly involved because Millie, you and I talked about this. We know that like Nancy's at war. Well, when she was speaker, when she was one of the most powerful Democrats, she's kind of slipped off into the quietness after what happened with her husband and everything else, and she stepped down and she's no longer speaker. But she hated the progressive left in her own party. Like you and I even talked about, like we could probably get her to flip on the progressive left. We probably could, to be honest, because she probably hates where the Democrats are going. We probably could get her to flip, right? But like,
Yeah, because they protest her all
right.
the time now, and
Sunrise Movement's
they
in
were
her
doing
office. Like
yeah.
Sunrise Movement's in her office. They're in Joe Biden and Kamala's offices. Like the monster of creation of the grassroots progressive left protesting highly socialist left are coming home to eat their own because they have to eat something. She hates that. I know she hates that. And so I'm not convinced when we saw how well and meticulously planned using these leftist groups from the beginning of 2020 through April, August of 2020 into October of 2020, and then into the election. I, I I think she saw a political advantage there. She got in way over her head and she fucked and she knew it, and she knew that her name being a national name would be completely screwed. And I think that was it was a cover her ass video. I don't disagree. But where I differ is that she did not expect what these assholes pulled off or tried to pull off or did pull off on January 6th. But I think that even those groups were actually taken over by somebody within our State Department or intel community. I mean, I'll say it, even though we're not supposed to say that the CIA does anything domestically. This seems very Brennan shit. This seems very Brennan Center, Brennan CIA stuff, man. Like this has his name all over it. That's where I'm at,
Trash.
Jim. That's where I'm at.
Trash, you're right on the money on that. I mean, definitely intel, but you keep talking about the CYA. What did she have to cover her ass from though? What did she know that she had to cover her ass from? That's my question to you is so that there was obviously something behind the scene that she knew. And look, this goes to a whole bigger picture because I've been thinking about all of this and everything y'all have been talking about. And what it brings me back to is even the current lawfare that's going on right now. They're trying to make sure that nobody like Donald Trump, it's not, it doesn't even have to be Trump. Nobody like him can take power again, because there is there's obviously such an emergency to hide whatever is happening in the federal government from us, that they have to protect it. I This is like the whole wounded animal thing. We're so close to being able to find out exactly how much the federal government is screwing us over, that they are taking every action possible to make sure we pay a penalty if we try to expose it. And I think that's the big picture thing about this, which explains why three close to 4 years later they're still going after January 6 people. I think that's what it is, and I think I think that's why they're trying to stop Donald Trump from being. It's not about Trump either. Anybody who's an outsider, I think they're trying to get that prevented from getting into any power, because it's all going to be exposed eventually, and we're going to actually know the truth of what our whole government is up to, and they don't want to turn over their power structure.
Yep.
Well,
Wait,
yeah,
Jen. Jen. I'm coming to you. I swear I'm coming to you, and I'm going to go to all the hands. Please don't be upset. I want to land on this point. One of the things that I know about the government specifically, when in all the investigations, all the exposures that I know about the government, is that each individual office puts the integrity and the reputation of the office above and beyond their duty to the American people. This is what we know. This is what we know about the FBI. This is what we know about the CIA. This is what we know about the NSA. This is what we know about all of our intelligence agencies. This is what we know about the DOD. It's what we know about the Pentagon, about all these major bureaucracies, is that I will protect my own, even if my own is fucking up and doing stupid shit, and I've got subversives in my group. If I'm the head of these areas, I'm going to protect the integrity of this office above and beyond actually speaking the truth and figuring it out and weeding people out. So what I think, Jim, and Jen, I'm going to come to you, but what I think is that I think that there are some people who are complicit by not exposing it or going along with it. But I think that a lot of people have discovered a lot of these subversives in many of their offices and many of their bureaucracies, and like the FBI and like CIA's, fuck the CIA. But like at the end of the day, also I think what I've learned over all of the exposure from between the whistleblowers of the different various offices is that the upper ups, the fifth and sixth level of the FBI, of the DHS, of all these other groups, they would rather protect the integrity of their office because that is their number one goal as a director or an associate director or a whatever they are. That their loyalty first is to that organization, that bureaucracy versus the American people, even though it should be accountable to the American people. And they will run cover for people that they may not been involved with, but they will run cover for them against the American people on exposure, because they don't want to be the one that goes down in history that allowed their bureau to be corrupted, co-opted, and then to show an embarrassment stain on society because all they really care about is their legacy. That's what seems to be happening here. But again, I think Millie and Jen's probably going to push back on me on this. I think most people will push back on me on this. I'm not protecting anybody. I'm not saying that the directors are not. Like Garland is completely complicit in this bullshit. Like that dude's reputation is all the way gone. He's a scorned bitch that couldn't get confirmed for SCOTUS, and he's really pissed off, and he's all in for the establishment. Like Garland is not it. Brennan is not it. John Bolton is not it. Like all these guys, fuck these guys. But I'm saying, like generally speaking, I feel like the subversives, and the reason I say this, Jim, and everybody else listening, and you guys are going to disagree with me. I'll hang up my microphone. I'll let everybody else talk. But I just want to say this: the Marxist training stuff, Millie, that we came out with, where they were actually like holding these Marxist trainings and how to hold Marxist trainings with federal workers, is an embarrassment and a stain on the office that these people actually existed to begin with. And when the people that lead these groups or lead these offices or lead the actual prosperity or future of them even existing like Project 2025, et cetera, that is their legacy, that organization died underneath them because of people that worked underneath them. All right, you know what? I'm
Okay,
probably gonna take a lot of heat. Yeah.
I'm gonna bounce too because I got to get up for a show tomorrow. But I want to say I agree with you. I'm I got you back on this. I think everything you said was right on the money on that.
Thanks, Jim. I
I
appreciate
mean,
you.
Jim, before you leave, can I just say one thing? You know, what you were saying about them going after, Trump and anyone around him, I would say that that's why we saw what we saw with Steve Bannon this week. Bannon's supposed to be on trial in September for the We Build the Wall thing, which I'm very heavily involved in. I was one of the co-founders of the project with Dustin and Brian Colfash. But I think that's why we saw Steve, because in 2016, arguably, it was Donald Trump and Steve right then and there. And if they're going to put Donald Trump in prison, Steve was one of the people who could step up and step in that place to go around and campaign and win that election if they are going to prevent President Trump from, campaigning.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all in anything that you just said. Absolutely.
If I could just really quick though say one more thing before you leave, Jim. So this material that proves that these federal government bureaucrats, thousands of them in our own government, were conspiring to interfere in the 2020 election and subvert the president. It's all on record. It's on my website, millennialmillie.com. I have it detailed in an article where I literally list the names of the people and all of the stuff you can find out about them on the internet, as well as it shows the videos, the documents of them subverting our government and interfering in the election and running scenario exercises. This material, some of it I originally put out a small clip, which you could see it's still pinned to my profile, right before the 2020 election, October 2020. But there was a heavy censorship campaign, and it came out in the Twitter files that the Sunrise Zoom calls were heavily censored. It was actually 8 out of 10, the top 10 most censored hashtag and subjects during the 2020 election. And they removed almost 500,000 hashtags of the Sunrise Zoom calls. And this material is huge because it implicates NATO. It implicates the Atlantic Council. It implicates many, like hundreds and hundreds of people with national security backgrounds, and people, the actual swamp in our federal government are on camera. And you can ask Laura Logan, who actually originally, she helped me vet and go through a lot of this when I first obtained it. And she said these people are committing crimes on camera. This is illegal what they're doing. And the thing that's terrifying the most about this is this group was working with the leftist protest groups that I have them on video planning to take over the government buildings, distributing documents that specifically talk about taking over the building on January 6th, the Capitol building, to disrupt the Electoral College vote count. They were engaging in shady get out the vote operations, which those operations directly link to Fani Willis via the head of that contingent that literally is a member of a fraternal organization, who Fani's dad is a member of, who Fani's lover Wade is also a member of. And then also Alvin Bragg is directly connected in with this group as well, via the Real Justice PAC and the author of some of the documents where they talk about taking over the government buildings. This is a group, like RICO case needs to be enacted against these people, a group of leftists that all came together and worked together to steal the election from President Trump in order to ensure that Biden would have it. Because at the end of the day, if you look at, where this all traces back to, I have plenty of evidence in these people's documents and the people that were in the calls, that this links back to NATO. And essentially the idea is that NATO helped do this to steal it from Trump so that they could use Joe Biden to fight their proxy war in Ukraine and to fund it. And that is exactly what we're seeing play out today and all throughout his presidency, We've seen the billions and billions and billions of dollars funneled into Ukraine. The reason why, look, I've taken this information to many people on different, on the Republican side of the aisle, and they've not done anything with it. And I keep hearing back that it's too big. And I'm thinking it's because it has implications on the global level of what that would imply with NATO having been involved in something like this. But the big thing is I can't get big platforms to cover this material for whatever reason. And it might just boil down to the fact that it's being censored so heavily. So I would really encourage and implore you to please reach out to me, because I would really love it if Dan Bongino would actually cover and expose this material so that we can get the American people to demand action, because the evidence is there. These bureaucrats, if they did a congressional committee on these bureaucrats and showed the evidence, it's enough to get subpoenas, and we could take the whole hive of them down.
So this is a perfect opportunity for me to jump in, because on the last points that you made, I've got some connections in that regard that could help. I know a couple people who work for the Gray Zone, and we could probably collate a lot of that information and get it put out there on a global news platform to independent medias as well. Would cite their article that they would put out about it. But there's already an article that's been written about a lot of that stuff, and it was written by George H. Eliason, and he exposed a lot of things in the past to do with the Clinton campaign in 2016, and he's based out of the Donbass now, and he revealed that there was I don't know if you remember Sergei Dubinin, who was also at the
No,
Capitol.
I hear what you're saying, and it's one thing if people are saying these things and maybe trying to make these stretches or these connections, but it's another thing to actually have these people sitting there in Zoom calls on video with their faces showing, basically admitting to crimes on camera.
Absolutely.
That's what I have. This is admissible in court, admissible in hearings, prima facie evidence of conspiracy and subversion against the president and interference in the election. It is undeniable. So it's not the same as, like, people trying to make these connections, which I think we all kind of have an idea of what's going on here, but we actually have them committing crimes on camera. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I think it needs to get out. And, just based on what we know happened with John Brennan in the past, and the information that he gave, the hacking materials that he gave to the Ukrainian government, and
Yeah.
how
So
they used
okay.
those.
Yeah, yeah,
Hold
yeah.
on,
Like,
hold
so.
on.
No,
I'll
actually,
land my
no,
plane in
Fitz,
like
hang
30
on.
seconds.
Yeah, no. I know you want to say what you got to
Yeah,
say.
no, why is a Canadian coming here and dispelling
Yeah. So
these
okay,
yeah, like what is happening
let
here?
me
I'm
separate.
sorry,
Let me separate.
America.
Yeah. So, like, let me separate between the two. I would like to end the point on specifically that there are actual materials. We are in their documents hub. Millie does have the video. Like, there is a case to be made, and we can also jump into why also were the orange team there at J6. Before we get there, I'm there. I understand where you're coming from, but I would like to land the point on is that there's not a blending line between the two. There is actual video evidence of which they have been inserted in the last 4 or 5 years of this government collusion of these contractors that worked at DHS, former Intel contractors. They announce themselves. They announce their names. They say their names. I worked for this. I work for this. I'm also interested in this. I'm willing to do this, this, and this. There's a very different thing that happened on the American side, on the domestic side, and I think that we can get into the Ukraine portion of this discussion. But before that, I want to have a hard line between the next progression of this conversation, because I understand what you're saying. I think it's a good conversation to have, but I would like to
Well,
draw a hard no.
I don't think it's important. Sorry, wrong. I think it's
Yep.
important.
Okay. So now you actually don't get the cue. It's like that's actually a problem. So, like, that feels like a some kind of op to me. Like, it's not hard for me to be able to draw a hard line between the evidence that we have domestically that is specifically speaking to a topic that we're talking about, and then, like, trying to move it on to something else. Like,
Why do
man,
you think I had the reaction I did, Trash?
exactly.
This is
Don't
what
do
happens
that.
every time. And it's usually not Americans who come in here and they start whatever the word is, right? Sitting there saying, oh, well, you don't actually have the evidence. You don't know what you're looking. No, we know what we're looking at, and we don't need people dispelling what we've seen and what we've done hours and hours of research on, and we know it's true. So stop trying to dispel the truth because we're standing on the truth.
Yep. And I'm drawing a hard line. I'm going to draw a hard line. Like, I'm willing to entertain that. I'm willing to talk about that. That sounds fun. But like, I have enough domestically that I don't need to talk about whatever else is going on. This is the problem. This is the problem with social audio, and that's why we may be hardcore. And people are probably listening. They're like, "Oh no, I've been following that too. Like, what are you doing? Are you guys like Russian disinformation agents?" No, we're drawing a fucking hard line between the information that we have with hard evidence, with video, with documents, with actual like video evidence, like a timeline of events to I would like to pontificate on why a Ukrainian media company would insert people into the crowd with cameras and helmets. Like, okay, cool, we can have that conversation. Like, that's fine. I'm willing to have that, but like, don't you dare hijack it and then spoil the entire conversation that we're having. Like, this is the problem that we have to deal with. And like,
Okay, fancy raccoon, because you can say the P word and I couldn't. Thanks for pointing that out.
I'm sorry, Jen. It was pontificate. My apologies. No, but you were correct. And again, so all right, reset, hard reset. Jim, thank you so much for showing up. I don't know if you're still here or not because I'm probably glitching. This space is probably being attacked like death. Like my
I'm
reach is going to be.
still here, but I appreciate you guys. It was a fascinating conversation, and thanks for. I got to thank Jack. Jacktron is the one who turned me on. So
Yeah.
thank you for tuning me into this, and glad to hear you. I love that so many people are passionate about this. I hate that this whole thing is happening, and I'm praying to God every day that we can save this country. And
Yeah.
there's a bunch of us out there who want to do it. And God bless all of you. I appreciate you.
No, I appreciate you, Jim, and give my best to Dan as well. And again, tell him I appreciate him for shouting me out. Uh, a lot of us out here have been doing this. We've been getting a burnt face and a bruised face. Like we get beat up out here, and but again, we're not wrong,
No,
and
you're
so we'll get there. We'll get there, man. We'll get there.
all right. Y'all take care. Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Jim. Thanks, Jim.
All right.
Jim's a rock star, by the way. So he is the producer of the Dan Bongino podcast and the Bongino radio show. He actually sometimes fills in. He's also actually happens to be like a really nice guy. And like I have some people that give me shit for Dan or whatever. I don't really give a shit. Like I like Dan's approach. He's a similar approach to myself. I don't want to speak for Millie, but like he also approaches shit. And he also has a fucking people like 5 million people follow him. Like, bro, like I can't even wage of whether or not what I talk about and what I don't talk about. So I'm not fanboying. I'm simply saying that like I couldn't even imagine of how to approach that. But I can tell you that there are a lot of people that actually understand what's going on, that are trying to find the truth. And I think that most of them are in this space. A lot of us, Millie, Jen, myself, Carolina, a lot of us on the space, we've been doing this stuff for like years at this point, but like the last 2 or 3 years, we've kind of been in the trenches. And again, we've seen this, right? I don't mean to shift the topic, but I do. We started doing spaces. We saw the value in spaces. Millie brought Dustin and Jen to spaces. Dustin and Jen brought me to Millie. Millie and I have become very close. Jen and I are very close, obviously. But we were doing these spaces and we saw the value. And we saw the value because we felt like this was like a jumping off point of the information war, where we saw, okay, if we bring a solid case, receipts based case, and we bring a bulletproof argument on this platform connected with a lot of people that are in media, journalistic efforts, podcasters, streamers, wherever, that the information will make its way out, even to Congress. And all of that's been true. And so we may only have what 500 something people listening to this space, but I can tell you, like at the end of it, it's going to be like 2,000 people listened, and then I check it in a week, and it's going to be 5,000. But the concentration of people that are putting this information out, it's going to be tenfold. And so I love you guys for this. This is why I wanted to do this. This has been a massive 560. That's actually kind of solid, Millie. Like Jen, Millie, like it's not like the numbers we were doing on daytime 6 months ago, but this is pretty solid. And this information is going to make it out. Um, but it's also a target-rich environment, meaning target. What I mean by that is it all the people that are listening that are actually engaged in this shit, that actually pay attention to this shit, that then go out and do media hits and they go do journalistic hits and they write articles or they go and talk to their Facebook groups or their individual groups. That's how this information permeates. It's a very, very concentrated group. And
But look at where we started from. Like,
yeah,
okay, so rewind to when we first started doing these spaces, and do you remember the atmosphere on Twitter during that time period? It was very bleak. I mean, the left was just going on and on with their J6 insurrectionist narratives, their false narratives, and they had their clown show hearings, and they just wanted to demonize Trump and demonize everyone. And all the while, it's like, my frustration, having went through all these different avenues trying to get this information out, as well as, at least I did do the documentary Side Up to Steal, but the Sunrise materials really and truly, taking the time to actually go through in detail, because you have to understand, like, that is a rabbit hole. I mean, Aaron can attest to that. Trash can testify to that. He's seen inside. I've shown him around, and it's just like a link within links and within documents within documents. And so it's a big rabbit hole, the way they organize their stuff all in these different Google Docs and hubs and whatnot. So it takes time to kind of find those threads, and actually, once you actually start to put certain things together, you realize, holy crap, and that's kind of somewhat of what happened, was the realization of just how, involved these groups were in pre-planning January 6th. And I think that big pivotal moment was that document the count, in how, they really spell it out plain and simple, of how they literally had a plan to take over the Capitol building on January 6th to disrupt the Electoral College vote count. I mean, plain and simple. And then you match that with the hours and hours of training sessions where they're planning to take over government buildings.
Oh, we might crash.
Uh-oh. Yeah, you juxtapose that, and so I think that this material, look, and I know there's been other reports out there as well that have been destroying the narrative that the left put out, meaning, some of the stuff with the FBI agents that were there at January 6th. But I really think that, like, there was this turning point moment on Twitter, especially, or X, where we started really getting the word out about this material, and, allowing people to push back against the false narratives that the left was putting out surrounding January 6th. Because as soon as you realize that the left was actually the ones pre-planning J6, and you put the whole picture together with all the surrounding circumstance and evidence and everything, it becomes very clear what happened. And that literally I can say with 100% certainty that January 6th was an inside job. I can say that. And what does that mean? Like, it was actually kind of tripping me out the other day, because we were actually talking about, Gavin and I were talking about 9/11 and 9/11 being an inside job. And one of the main things is, like, I'm rehashing and hearing it, this whole, like, we were listening to some 9/11 stuff, and one of the main things is, like, they knew, the FBI had these reports that there were going to be attacks on the Twin Towers, and yet they didn't do what necessary things that needed to be done to prevent that. And that was, like, a big deal, that they knew that the terrorist groups were planning to do that. And so that's the thing here. These law enforcement agencies knew these groups were planning to take over the Capitol building. And I know that for a fact, because I was sending them these materials, okay? And I was talking to them. And so how could our law enforcement, who surveils and spies on everyone and does all this and has all these FISA privileges and NSA over collection and everything else, how could they have not known and been watching these groups after what I sent them and taken the necessary precautions to protect the Capitol building? How? Right? And then when you see all the federal government bureaucrats who literally were on video pre-planning and organizing and coordinating with these groups, I mean, it becomes clear as day that the whole thing was really and truly, and I hate to say it, but it was an actual conspiracy, right? It was a conspiracy fact, a criminal conspiracy. We're not talking about tinfoil hat, conspiracy theory, or whatever they want to label you as. A conspiracy is a crime, right? It's actually a crime that you can be charged with. And that's what these people were engaging in, was a criminal conspiracy against our president and against our election process.
Oh, it was. And I think that's what we've been trying to prove tonight. And again, thank you guys for showing up tonight. I really appreciate you guys showing up. We got plenty of hands. I'm not closing down. I just wanted to say thank you guys for showing up. I think that Millie's work that she's done in the last 4 years, the work that I've done here on X, after being reinstated after a couple of years, has been noble. I think a lot of us have put in a lot of work, and I appreciate you guys showing up. And I'm telling you, I don't think we're fucking wrong on this space. Like, I don't think we're wrong at all. And like, maybe we get some victory laps, maybe we get some kind of restitution, but like, there's a lot of criminals within our country and our government, and I don't know what the enforcement of that looks like. I'm not. I don't know. I don't know. But thank you guys. Thank you guys. Um,
I was going to say, let's
yeah,
get to
yeah,
some of
yeah,
these
yeah.
hands. Really curious to hear other people's thoughts.
No, me too. I would like to hear some thoughts as well. I don't have an order, so Kim, go ahead. Kim, you with us?
I think she's
Shit,
in the back
sorry. I was
channels.
crafting.
Oh, I
I was
see.
crafting. Can you hear me? I was just going to say a long, long time ago that we can't forget about General Milley in the whole January 6th thing. So I was recently watching the whistleblowers from the National Guard, and in that hearing, they said some pretty poignant things about the upper echelons of the DOJ or the.
Yeah, so they did, Kim. Yeah, so they did. Actually, matter of fact, I've got it right here. I think I've got it actually pulled up. Let me go to Trash Discourse's profile. All right, so I think I've got it here. If you guys want to hear it again, let me pull this up. Give me 1 second.
Let's get to some hands though, really quick, while you're pulling it up. Just and then we'll go deep into the Millie, General Millie, not me, direction. Go ahead,
Pauline,
NCS, you gal. I know you've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about Millie too, where he wrote that letter. Thank you for letting me talk, by the way. But that letter where he said that President Trump was still the commander in chief. He was trying to do kind of like a psyop to make it look like he was still in command under Trump, and Trump was in charge. But behind the scenes, I think there was a lot. He was involved heavily. But I actually think this whole thing with Pelosi, uh, it's interesting the timing that it came out, because everybody had been saying, and even President Trump had been saying, that she was in charge of it all. She was planning it. She was. So I really think this is a CYA, that this video came out to pretend like she didn't know anything about it, and that they were supposed to have the National Guard on hand, and it was her responsibility, because in 20 minutes she was up on the national news trying to say that this is revisionist history. So I just think it's all too, and I kind of feel like there is some movement on this with Clay Higgins and those crowds. I think there's a behind the scenes January 6th committee, at least I'm hoping. The real select committee, because I think there's going to be some wars about the fact that And it's already starting to come out that this was an illegitimate committee. Bannon spoke to Tucker about that they didn't have Republicans on that committee, that Pelosi had decided that they weren't going to be on it. So she was really heavily involved. But there's one more thing that I wanted to mention back. I was following some of Millennial Millie stuff back in 2021, and then all of a sudden it all disappeared. Like her whole website, I couldn't ever find it again. But I think I seem to remember where everybody congregated in the floor of the Capitol, and there were a bunch of actors. Did that happen? It was like out near the windows where where they broke the windows, but this was even before January 6th happened. There was a video like that, and then it disappeared. Does anybody remember that? Do you remember that, Millie?
Are you talking about the Georgia Capitol, when they went down to the Georgia Capitol and kind of
I think it was actually,
walked in there?
no, it was the Capitol building in DC, and they were all the actors that were wearing Trump stuff, and they were down in there, and they were having conversations about how they were going to pull this whole thing off. It was very obvious actors. I don't know if that was
Are
in
you
your.
talking about like John Sullivan and many other people like in the tree line where they're switching in from black bloc to Trump supporter gear and then they're going into the Capitol? Is that what you're talking
Well,
about?
this was outside of the Capitol. I did see that, but no, I saw a group of people in the floor of the Capitol. They had leaders and people discussing it, and that video disappeared and never showed back up again.
So the one guy, okay, so like the one guy that was pulled into like the Capitol building hallway and he was like arrested from behind and he was released. Everyone's focusing on that guy. He's actually serving, I don't know, like 36 or I don't know,
Not
42 months.
John Sullivan. This was
No,
a whole group
I'm not
down
talking
there
about
near the
John Sullivan.
windows.
Okay, all right.
Sorry, down there near I apologize, but down there near the window where they break them. They were in the bottom of the Capitol building where the windows are. And they had a meeting in the floor down there.
I think she's talking about the party room, Trash. If I'm right, it would be Lower West Terrace Tunnel, the window to the left. Other than that, I'm lost.
Yeah, no, I mean, like there was a lot of things.
Anyways, I was just asking, wondering if anybody recalled that.
I don't know. I think we would probably have to have more specific information on what you're referring, because I think we're all kind of lost here. So,
Trash,
Okay.
Millie, I'm going to take off. Thank you guys for letting me talk. Thank everybody else for listening.
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate you. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming
thanks
up.
for coming.
So, okay. So, a lot of people, guys, I'm going to go to, I think the next hand would be Helena. And Helena, I'm definitely coming to you. And then Philip, I saw your hand up. But a lot of people are actually in the comments talking about like Mark Milley's involvement and whether or not the Secretary of the Army, Secretary of Defense had changed the rules. I mean, I could play this video again. I mean, Milley, you heard it. Jen, you heard it. I can play it again, or we could just like move on and shut down. Like, it's up to you guys.
I wouldn't mind hearing it one more time.
All right. All right. So this is all right. So this is essentially the guy who would be able to deploy National Guard on DC. He actually had the authority, but he was overruled by the SecDef and the Army Secretary. So here we go.
Start with you, if I could. You've testified to several senators today that you faced restrictions for the deployment of the quick reaction force that you had assembled. And those are restrictions that you had not had to deal with before. Is that broadly correct?
That is correct.
What is your understanding for why those restrictions were put in place?
Well, Senator, it was never really explained to me. So I'm a major general. I don't question the people above me. Secretary of the Army is the Secretary of the Army. Secretary of Defense is the Secretary of Defense. So all I know is that it was I had restrictions that
Yeah, like keep in mind, like this guy has like war medals down like the left side of his breast jacket all the way to his stomach. Like, and he's a Major General William Walker, District of Columbia National Guard. Like, this is all fuckery.
They were unusual to me. I hadn't had them in the past.
You answer the same question, and in particular, whether you had the authority to employ a quick reaction force prior to the January 6th, and would that have potentially made a difference on January 6th if you had been able to do so?
So, Senator Cruz, I would have had that authority prior to January 6th to employ, direct a quick reaction force. So the Secretary of Defense, his letter authorizes me to use the quick reaction force, and it says only as a last resort. Where the Secretary of the Army, his direction to me uh, withholds the authority to use the quick reaction force, and he will only authorize that and only after he has a concept of operations sent to him, a CONOP sent to him. So that was restriction that was unusual to me. I had never seen that before.
This is my problem. Like, it's one thing to say that like Nancy Pelosi was in on it, right? And it's one thing for me for people to say to me that like she understood at a political level that like maybe we should let these people through. I know that I can actually order the sergeant of arms to then cue the National Guard on the National Mall to then cue Muriel Bowser's DC protections outside of the National Mall. That's one thing to say. It's another thing to say that like they're rewriting the entire rule book on January 5th from SecDef and from the Secretary of Army and then have conflicting rules, and people will say, well, yeah, like of course, like the Secretary of Army can maybe say one thing, but you in your devoted capacity should be only paying attention to the Secretary of Defense, their rules. But like that's not actually what happened. And like so it's very hard for me to believe that Nancy Pelosi would have enough pull, enough strength over the Secretary of Defense and the Defense Army Secretary to be able to change the rules to suit her narrative to then insert her daughter to make a documentary. I think what's most likely here is that all of those things happened because of influences outside of our political sphere, our intel communities. You know what? Fuck it. The CIA, who actually employed Lisa Fithian, who actually employed these ground troop people, would actually be in cahoots with the same like barred major general of DC of the National Guard. Like, I don't believe that.
Let me remind you, though, Trash, in the Feds for Democracy calls, there are retired lieutenant colonels of the Air Force, people who are on the National Security Council, people with top secret clearances, people in all different walks of government, including, professors that teach naval warfare strategy techniques. Like, I hear what you're saying. Like, it doesn't make sense to just try to connect, and say Nancy Pelosi's the grand conspirator. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the deep state, working as well with outside foreign forces like NATO forces, worked to essentially run a coup on Trump. And there were many people involved, but they're involved in a need to know basis. They're involved in essentially given marching orders, so to speak, and their handlers do a lot of it. Like, I don't think Nancy Pelosi would have to know the full plot to just be part of this group and this cabal that were out to get Trump by any means. So I hear what you're saying, like in that context, but that doesn't mean that she wasn't part of the plan and didn't play her own role in it.
I don't think you guys realize how powerful Nancy Pelosi is. Like, I really don't think you realize. And you got to realize that part of Nancy Pelosi's power is she embraced the grassroots progressive left and gave them a seat at her table, right? She brought them in. She literally had one of their representatives literally in her office all day, every day. He's making decisions. They're bringing them in. They have an open door policy. They can come in whenever they want, right? Like, I'm not saying like a grand, like she's like the grand wizard of this whole thing, right? And I don't think there is a grand wizard. I think you had a bunch of groups come together and they all had a board table and each representative group had a seat at the table and that board made the decision of what was going to happen on January 6th, right?
Yes. Yes.
But you cannot say that Nancy Pelosi did not have any power in it.
Nope.
And I don't understand what the question is about Alexandra Pelosi, because if they knew that was going to happen at the Capitol, Nancy Pelosi had her daughter there to videotape everything as it played out as a way, as a fallback for Nancy to say, oh my God, I didn't know what was going on. But in actuality, she's the one who's running the Capitol. And if you don't think Nancy Pelosi says jump and everybody at that Capitol says how high, you're crazy.
100%.
Well, the other, just a second, what Jen's saying, like, come to think of it, Nancy Pelosi's father was like laced up with the mob. Like, if you look into Nancy Pelosi's father, there's some really weird, crazy stuff going on with him, and I think that they had something to do with like this goes back to like the Kennedy days of like conspiracy around
Harvey
Kennedy's
Milk.
assassination.
Wait, what?
Harvey Milk.
Yeah, like these are the old dynasties. So like if you remember in the Kennedy time period, I honestly think that he might have been one of our last actual presidents. Like I'm not even kidding you. Before the CIA straight took over. And a lot of these presidents that kind of followed after the fact were pretty much deep state chosen people. And you a lot of these people that you see today even in politics are family or somehow connected to some of these original deep state families and dynasties. And the reason is because they keep it in the family, they keep it tight knit, because it is an organized crime cabal essentially. I can't hear Trash if he's talking. I
I
don't know.
can't hear Trash either.
Me
I guess
neither.
let's go to some.
I thought you just did a. I thought you just did a mic drop, Millie.
No, right. Let's go to some hands. Go ahead, Philip.
Wait, hold on. Helena's been waiting forever. Philip, 1 second. Helena, go, and then Philip.
Thanks, Jen, because there's something that's really important that I want to tell you and Millie. So I am from DC, and I was at every event leading up to Jan 6. And Millie, I want to tell you something about them boarding up the city. I witnessed it. Muriel Bowser was preparing for something very big. We were out in the streets. We were walking around. There were a lot of Proud Boys here in town, and when everybody was preparing, and the night before, when Enrique got arrested in the tunnel when he came in, and they picked him up for the burning of the banner back in December that he took responsibility for, even though he didn't do that. I was up at the courthouse the entire day. It was my birthday, and I was waiting for him to be released when he was banished from DC. And then, unfortunately, he had that encounter with Stuart Rhodes in the parking garage, which I really truly believe kind of sort of got him super pent up. Like if he would have, we took him back to the Phoenix Hotel after we retrieved his property from the police station. And if he would have just left, he was supposed to leave to go to Maryland and not be pulled into that parking garage. And maybe we can have a whole nother conversation about that. But
I add something there, Helena, that you might find really interesting about the parking garage
well,
meeting.
let me just finish saying this, because all of those things, all the preparation were definitely happening because I witnessed it. I grew up here. I'm still here in DC, outside of DC, but I'm still here in DC. And Jen Lowe who had been investigating Antifa cells all over the country, was up on the Upper West Terrace. And Jen has footage that she turned over to all of the different organizations. You know, Summerall's been going through, Global Discovery, and he was hired to, go through video forensically, and Gary McBride and a lot of other people. I'm sad that Tommy left, because when Jen was on that Upper West Terrace, she saw two Antifa operatives, called them out by name because she had been investigating, especially the ones out in Portland. She called them out by name, and they ran away from her. Jen was supposed to come here to DC to testify for Enrique, and we know that her testimony, along with Adriana and Bobby Pickles, was also foiled by the prosecuting attorneys when Julie Kelly put up that article, the honeypot article about Jen. It was all in an effort not to have them testify, because if Jen would have testified that she called Antifa out by name on the Upper West Terrace, she would have been able to at least get on the record that Antifa was in that crowd that day. I'm going to tell you guys, and this is obviously just my personal opinion, but I think she is one of the first and foremost experts on Antifa, in addition to obviously Taylor Hanson and a lot of the Proud Boys as well, because we were all investigating cells of Antifa all over the country to the lead up to January 6th. And you really have to know the backstory in order to understand. It's an onion. Layers upon layers upon layers have to be unpeeled and spoken about. But I had to tell you guys that, because Millie, you were right, and Jen, you were right too. And I would have been remiss if I didn't speak on that, because it's really important. Big piece of the puzzle, putting this all together to get to the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you very
Well,
much. That's really what I wanted to say.
I freaking love you, Helena. Thank you. Right. And you know what's really crazy, right? You talk about boarding up of the city. When we got to DC on January 5th, I felt like I walked into a freaking war zone. Okay, they had false facades on buildings. They had the dump trucks pulled two into the street. They had cops and National Guard marching around, and like I felt like I was in like Baghdad. And I'm like, what are they preparing for? Like, there's never been any violence. Like, what are you preparing for? Why are you doing this? You're making people feel like you're in a war zone, right? And when you see that happening around you, right, your natural instinct is like, oh shit, I need to prepare like I'm going to war, right? So like, what were they trying to set people up to get into that mental state, right? And then Helena, you mentioned Antifa. You know what? And I'm remiss I didn't say this earlier, but like I keep so much information in my head. Sometimes I like don't say things, right? But like the first two rallies that we held in DC, we had an enormous amount of counter protesters, right? They kept them for so on the first rally in November, they were on motorbikes and they tried to run the police barricade on motorbikes and the police had to stop them, right? And then the second time, counter protesters everywhere, but they were kept to the backside of the Supreme Court. Except on January 6th, there was no counter protesters. There was no protesters. So why were you having a war zone, yet there were no counter protesters to fight anybody?
Can
So
I
real
ask you a question
quick,
about that, Jen?
Absolutely, Jen. You're spot on, and you're 1,000% correct. I've never seen so many tanks. I've never seen so many roadblocks, so many buildings boarded up. They were certainly preparing for something. What that something was, well, I think we're all unpacking it here. Sorry, Millie, I didn't interrupt, but I had to agree with you, Jen. You're right. I witnessed it. I saw it for myself. I was here. And especially during the summer of 2020, during all the riots, when we were out in the streets and Antifa and BLM were burning my city down to the ground. I witnessed it all, Jen, all of it.
So really quick, we'll go to Stealth first because I think she had a question, and then I'll just kind of give you the little tidbit of information I can give you guys about some insight into that garage meeting. Go ahead,
Thanks so much,
Stealth.
Millie. Jennifer, I have a question. Is there a possibility, and thank you everybody, hey trash everybody, is there a possibility they set up the framework, the environment that way initially to be a deterrent, right? So so there's signaling, there was signal intelligence that said that that Antifa will show up. So they knew because of the permits based on rallies and speeches that potentially there could be an issue. So what you do to do information warfare and to create a psychological narrative was to set up the city as if it looked like a red dawn or God forbid Olympus has fallen environment, right? And so not so much first of all, it's a psychological type of operation, right? So there's a psychological portion of it. The flip side is for regular people that would see that are like unsophisticated or like regular people like myself that never goes to protest or rallies or anything like that, or if I would see that kind of environment, it's a signal to me that this is a no-go zone. Like there's towns in Paris I wouldn't go to because they're no-go zones, or Belgium, and therefore you would pull out, and therefore regular civilians would just pull out of that area thinking, yeah, maybe not today I'm going to visit the Capitol, or maybe not today I'm going to go. And so that weeds out the regular schmegulars. And then what does come
No,
in, is that a possibility that was?
no, I don't think
Well,
so.
here's the
No,
thing. Here's the thing really quick. Like I hear you guys, like Jen and Helena, I know you guys were there, but from my perspective, I didn't see a big military presence there. And one of the things that actually stood out, and Gavin was saying this as well, like we were actually surprised at how low key everything was, especially on January 6th. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? This is kind of bizarre. Like, I didn't see
So
any
Millie,
police. Like,
yeah, but
I really didn't.
hold on, Millie.
Especially, hold on, especially compared to the inauguration.
Yeah,
The
but Millie, were
inauguration
you
was a big
staying
on
inside the
the.
zone?
Yes, I was. I was staying at the same freaking hotel as John Sullivan.
No, but at the Willard
Turns
is what
out.
I'm talking about, at Freedom Plaza.
Yeah, it was literally
There was a
like I was
coordinated
probably a
off
couple.
zone that was like a block behind the Freedom Plaza, right? You had to go through those checks to get into that area, right? Like, I wasn't allowed to go out and walk around. I wasn't allowed, I had to stay within the cordon off area that was a permitted zone around the Willard and the JW Marriott.
I mean, at one point, didn't they lock you guys in there, Jen?
Yeah, they locked us into the hotels. They literally buried, Millie knows this.
That was after, like, this is what it was. Like, I literally was staying right next to the JW and the Willard. I was like, probably like not even a block away. Like, I'm not even kidding you. It was right, one of the hotels right next door. And like I noticed on January 6th there wasn't a big presence, but then as soon as I guess the morning of January 6th there wasn't a big presence, but then as soon as the stuff happened at the Capitol and Trump said everybody go home, all of a sudden, like during that time period, police sirens were going everywhere, and then they locked it down, and then it became like Red Dawn. So I guess you're right. Like January 6th was a Red Dawn, but it wasn't until after, and then they started doing this really psychotic like curfews where they would like go and harass people and lock them into the hotels, and I was filming the fighting that was happening at the JW Marriott and the fighting that was happening up at my hotel, and people were getting into it with the police, like physically, because the police were trying to harass people that were smoking
Well,
cigarettes outside of the hotel.
well, Millie, don't you remember this was right after that bombing in Nashville, and then like was it the night of January 6th, or was it like January 7th, that weird ass, like the same exact freaking RV thing was parked at Freedom Plaza, and they told us it was a bomb, and we all had to run and get into the interior of the building because they told us that a bomb was going to go off, right? And then the night of January 6th, right? We're all up in the Willard. all of a sudden they bring in the freaking, like, I think it was like the military or the National Guard, and they freaking surrounded the whole Willard, like around us, like surrounded us in perimeter, and like our security's looking at us and they're like, guys, we don't know what's going on right now. And I'm looking out the window and I'm like, they're gonna come in and fucking drag our asses out. That's what's gonna fucking happen right now.
Well,
Right? Like that's what
Jennifer,
they made us feel like. And that's when they started locking us in the hotels. And I can't remember if it was January or December where the police came and they actually took metal bars and stuck them in the doors of the hotel so you couldn't get out, which was a fire hazard.
Yes,
Yeah,
and that happened the night of January 6th.
so
Just to be
Jen,
clear.
so my understanding is I heard the narrative, what Millie said, that it looked like a normal town, nothing was elevated, and then there was almost like a light switch that went off, like, okay, this is a go, and then the ramping up of like defensive measures. My understanding is when you
Well,
sur-
let's not forget
oh,
that our government recently came out and announced that they were using mind control weapons on us too. So,
Wait, what?
I mean, did
What?
that play a role?
uh,
Yeah, they had a hearing.
Okay, I don't know.
okay,
Well,
no, I just
let's
No,
wanted to say
finish
she's
one
really
right,
thing.
quick.
Trash. In
Let's
a congressional hearing, they were talking about how they use mind control weapons. This actually happened.
Yes, we know that they were using psyop stuff, and that's a good point, Kim. But let's let Stella
Yeah,
finish
my
her thought,
one question
because
was this:
yeah,
is once they surrounding the hotels, what you would do is if there's a high value target staying in that hotel, um, especially if they're in a penthouse, they would surround the hotel that way if they're a high value person, right? So there could be an
No,
ambassador.
Stealth, you don't understand what I'm
I
talking
know
about.
I
I
don't
know what
understand.
I
I know I don't
understand
understand.
security, Stealth.
Yeah,
I know I do. Okay. But this was not them securing a high value target. This was them fucking intimidating the shit out of us.
it could be that those hotels are very old and very expensive, and they did not want damage, and they did not want to see
No,
regular
Stealth,
civilians
you don't
killed.
understand what I'm talking about. There was nothing happening outside. They showed up out of the blue and surrounded our hotel for no
yeah,
fucking
that's
reason.
Interesting.
so like this is just to kind of paint the picture for yourself. What it was is okay. So the Trump told everyone to go home or go back, right? They did. The people listened and they literally went back to their hotels, and there was a good period of time where we were getting all these reports of curfew, and the curfew notifications were going out like over that Amber Alert type of system on your phone, and they were saying that if you're a journalist, you're allowed to be out and about, but everybody else has curfew and you have to be inside. And so I was out walking around because I'm a journalist and I'm like, okay. But what happened is there was like a switch that went off where all of a sudden they drove around, probably, I'm not even kidding you, like at least 100 police cars deep. Okay. And the police went in giant hordes and they all got out of their vehicles in riot gear and they marched. And what was going on was you had all these people staying at hotels, right? Because they were there traveling to go to this Trump rally, and then they were in their hotels. Well, a good portion of people staying at the hotel smoke cigarettes. So the thing was basically the streets were practically empty. But then you'd have like crowds of cigarette smokers that were just out front in the like valet area smoking cigarettes, and that's what it was at the JW Marriott, because they hit them first from what I saw. And they literally marched all out in their riot gear, and they formed lines and they literally moved on these people that were just literally standing there quietly smoking cigarettes,
I have it
and
on
they started
video from
getting
above,
physical.
Millie.
And I was videoing it on the ground, like with my camera, and they started harassing me, saying, "Go, you're gonna get arrested. You're violating curfew. You're gonna get arrested." I'm like, I'm a journalist. It says I'm allowed to be out here, and they were threatening me. And I basically was filming. They started getting violent with them and shoving them back into the hotels. Then after they did that one and shoved all those people in and were threatening to arrest others that didn't, they moved along to the next hotel, which was the one I was staying up right up the road. And I went and filmed that one too. And they got physically violent with the people out there smoking cigarettes. And it got into an all out, the people got into a brawl and a fight with the police, and it ended up breaking some signage and things in front of the hotel because the police were physically shoving people into the doors, and it was a violent thing that was going on. So yeah, it was not anything like, oh, we're trying to keep a building safe or people were out of control at a hotel. No, the hotel didn't call them. The hotel's like, what the hell is this? Like, it was an intimidation thing. So what Jen's saying is 100% true. They did do this after January 6th happened.
Millie,
Well, let me just jump in real quick, because when Muriel Bowser sent out that text message that she was enacting that curfew at 6 o'clock, John opened up Harry's for me and several other people. And after he made us burgers and we got a chance to warm up, because it was freezing cold that day and the damn wind was just whipping. And we started walking back up towards the Capitol. So I only found out about all of that stuff later on. Like, all of that, what you all just discussed, absolutely happened. But me and Suzanne and Monk and her husband walked back up to the Capitol, and we were out there for a good 3-4 hours. And the riot police was out there, the National Guard was out there. There was no less than 30 press corps out there. And never once did they tell us to go back home or any of that. We were talking with them, we were singing, we were praying. But when Muriel Bowser said, go home at 6 o'clock, I had literally been just pushing back during all that COVID garbage that was going on here in DC. And I said, there's no way that this lady's going to tell me to do anything. And I was just so adamant about walking around, just like you, Millie. I didn't have press credentials, but there was no way that I was going back to my house. I mean, I would have had to go back over to Virginia because I was living in Arlington at the time, about 5 minutes from the Pentagon. But they had, we couldn't get an Uber, we couldn't get a train. Like, the entire city was locked down. It was completely locked down. I just wanted to tell you guys that.
Oh yeah, and people were staying inside for the most part. It was just, people smoking out front of their hotels, because like it was like me and like one other guy, and we were the only ones really walking around, and we were both pressed. So yeah, it was a whole mess. And the other thing is that I noticed is literally by the next morning, when I went and looked, and we were starting to, go down towards the Willard or whatever to go meet with Rudy, they had the riot fencing erected everywhere. They had that like 12-foot tall riot fencing, the whole thing. Like, they had literally gates surrounding the whole National Mall. They had that thing on lock. Okay. And I'm thinking, well, wow, would have been nice if they had put in the 12-foot gates up around the Capitol beforehand, right? Like, when we were telling them, and I was telling them that there was a threat that you had groups that were going to take over government buildings, might have been a smart idea to, put some of that up beforehand. But it just shows, like, they had withheld all of their security, and then it was like the minute, they let to me it felt like this. Felt like our government let J6 happen, and then the second they got their op done, they instantly went, boom, done, it's done, and they shut it all down, and they turned it into a freaking police state, like Red Dawn looking military zone. And it was like,
Millie,
wow.
what is the difference between what you saw on Friday at DC when they, were using smoke bombs and surrounding the White House and the Capitol versus what it looked like, because there's gates there now, but versus what it looked like on the January 6th timeframe? Is it a different? I don't know. Has anybody been down there since the big event on Friday that occurred
What are you talking about? On
this past
Friday?
Friday?
This past
Yeah. This.
Friday? I haven't been there. I haven't been down there this
Oh,
past
okay.
Are
Friday.
you wondering it's the same gates? Because I have video of like the gates that they put up. Because they even plywooded off the back of the Willard, right? The Willard has two entrances, and we were able to use both entrances. Except like then all of a sudden they like literally plywooded the thing in so no one could get out the entrance, which is a fire hazard.
So Jennifer, that's crazy. First of all, crazy about the fire hazard component, because if they were worried about an incendiary device or a manufactured incendiary device, you would at least have one exit point, which would either be the rear or the front of the hotel, right? Or most likely would be.
You can't have one exit for the entire Willard.
Right, you would.
Right? And you have
Right,
to
so
understand the Willard is within Secret Service perimeter. Right? Because it's literally almost on White House grounds. Like it's literally right at the White House.
That's probably why they were so intense with it. So that's why I was asking the question. No, my question was, is on this past Friday when they did the Alexa flood, whatever, and surrounded and did crazy stuff. Was the response from the because they pushed back the DC police and they pushed back, I think, the White House, and they retreated. Was the response similar that night on like this past Friday night as it was on the J6 night, where curfews? I can understand curfews because you want to preserve civilians, and anybody's that would not be considered a civilian, you would assume are out on the streets, right? Other than reporters, right? Or people needing to drive people somewhere. So I understand how I would lock down the city if I thought, God forbid, civilians would get mixed in with an op going on, right? You don't want, like, in their mind, anybody was at a certain point, didn't go home, we're part of the op, whether on one side or the other, or maybe nine sides, who knows what it is. But once that occurred, Red Dawn lockdown, so to speak, and then because that hotel was in such close proximity, nearly on, like you said, the property, you would then keep that one the most secure, like to begin with. That would be like the closest thing you could have to protecting the White House, essentially, in their minds. I just don't understand. If was there ever a conversation with the police department, like when they came to bother people, saying, "Okay, hey, we're just going to finish our cigarette, we're going to go in." Just curious, is there a threat? Was there a threat of those pipe
No,
bombs?
there was no talking to them. I'm telling you,
Wow,
they were
wow,
literally like,
like
Millie, what's the
nonverbal,
word
like
I'm looking
nonverbal.
for?
They went nonverbal.
They were hostile.
Yeah,
Like
is
they
that
were out to get us. I felt like I was in enemy combat in a freaking foreign country.
They didn't factor in the cigarette smokers, right? So they had to get everybody inside. Why?
What? Why are the cigarette smokers like the center of the focus? Like, I don't understand.
Because they were the ones technically I'm so done. I'm sorry guys. I have to go to bed. I love you all, but I gotta go. My brain's gonna explode.
Yeah, good night, guys.